Welcome. This is Adults Talk. We talk about cool stuff. We are adults, I should say. And today we are here to talk about this hot new video game, kind of new. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. It's called Baldur's Gate 3. Today is January 15th, 2024, and I am joined by two fellow adventurers. I should say I am Flex from Raleigh, North Carolina. Joining me are Will from Wendell, North Carolina. How are you today, sir?
I'm pretty good. I'm also known as a gold dwarf fighter named Redingaro, and I've got curly hair that makes me look kind of like a little chia pet.
Perfect. Love it. Also joining us is Ryan from New York. How are you today, Ryan?
I am also representing a fighter, a human fighter. I guess we have a fighter crowd today.
Mm-hmm.
Two fighters and
me.
a wizard, sorcerer.
I was a forest gnome wizard.
Okay.
But yes, we will dive into our characters for sure. I should say up front that spoilers are allowed. They are on the table for this podcast. So if you do not want to be spoiled about anything for Baldur's Gate 3, this is your one and only warning up front. And yeah, so this game came out in August of 2023. We're getting to this podcast in January of 2024 because this is a big game. Take some time to get through. And
Wow.
one thing that I think's nice about the three of us here is we have slightly different perspectives. Ryan, I believe you played both Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, correct?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because you mentioned adults talking about cool things, and I played Baldur's Gate, both 1 and 2. I started with 2 back when I was in high school, which was this was like early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, I mean, it's been a while for this franchise and stuff, but also makes me feel really old. But yeah, I there was kind of an explosion like this. I feel like Baldur's Gate 2, perhaps in particular, was kind of a breakout for BioWare of the era. Before they started games like Knights of the Old Republic and Mass Effect, they were kind of known for Baldur's Gate, specifically 2. And yeah, Baldur's Gate 2 actually got me and my brother both into CRPGs pretty heavily. You mentioned Baldur's Gate 1, Baldur's Gate 2. There was like Planescape Torment and Neverwinter Nights there's kind of a glut of them. I think part of the reason the genre fell off might have been just because there were so many. But a lot of really great games kind of in that era. And also it kind of got both me and him into some of the D&D novels. So authors like R.A. Salvatore and like the Dragonlance series, like you'll see some of those on like top like I guess modern popular fantasy novels. You'll probably see some of the like Dragonlance novels and a lot of pretty cool stories kind of out of these worlds. But yes, that is a very long way of saying yes, I have played some of the older games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I never played Baldur's Gate 1 or 2. I did play Neverwinter Nights, but I think that was the only BioWare one I played. I mean, from like the Forgotten Realms setting. I did play more of their console games from like KOTOR on. But there's also been and the genre kind of fell off for a while, and it's kind of had a little bit of a resurgence here lately with, there was a lot of Kickstarter games like Pillars of Eternity and a couple other like in that mold. A lot from Obsidian, but I think there were some others as well, including Larian themselves, the developers of Baldur's Gate 3. they had been making Divinity games forever, and then Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2 really picked up traction in the mid 2010s and really set themselves up as kind of like the prime developer in this CRPG space. And then Baldur's Gate 3 absolutely explodes. Do you have much experience with this type of like quote unquote CRPG, if that term even means anything anymore?
In a way, I mean, I played through Divinity Original Sin 2, and I played through uh, a good chunk of hours of the first Divinity Original Sin, but that's kind of more recent, so it's not
Mm-hmm.
like the classics of the genre. But I guess it's also interesting to kind of see how Larian has kind of evolved their approach, how they've sort of honed their craft. But yeah, that's mostly my experience, which is just kind of other Larian stuff as opposed to the big classics.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think some would argue that the Larian games themselves are kind of modern classics, so to speak. Like I mean, not that there aren't other good ones too, like the Obsidian stuff, for example, but uh, Larian does seem to be kind of the premier modern torchbearers of the genre.
Yeah, yeah, carrying the torch into the future, into the present.
Yes.
Well, and I
Um,
guess, I guess that also, I am curious, like, would you consider games like Mass Effect and The Witcher to be in like the CRPG space, or would that be getting more into like a AAA action game?
yeah, that we can start like debating some terminology there. Like Mass Effect is maybe like a little tangential, like you do um like you are managing a party with different abilities and different classes and all that stuff. The Witcher only being one character, um, maybe feels a little different to me. I mean, Mass Effect is definitely more actiony too. Like to me, yeah, Mass Effect is almost more of a third-person shooter than RPG. So like those games definitely have a different feel to me. Like from games I've played, like you had the classics that Ryan was talking about earlier up through around the Neverwinter Nights time period. I think that was the last one BioWare did before they shifted to more action type stuff. Except for Dragon Age Origins, the first Dragon Age definitely felt like this mold of like quote unquote classic CRPG. Um, Dragon Age 2 and Inquisition then kind of pivoted back towards a little bit more of an action event, but that first Dragon Age game was very much this type of game.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure where the delineation is, and like, CRPG is kind of a vague term anyway.
Yeah.
It often refers to those isometric games, but the reason I was wondering is out loud is just because like the dialogue trees, like sort of like Mass Effect, it's the reputation systems, like they kind of carried some of the things they had applied to games like Baldur's Gate into whatever whatever type of game,
Yeah.
sort of these Western RPGs, right, that really try to focus on like building a story and your decisions matter and things like that.
Yeah. I do think Mass Effect like narratively kind of feels in this space. Mechanically it feels very different. So do you call that a CRPG? I don't know. Like at some point I kind of throw my hands up and like, yeah, what does all this labeling matter? but
So
but
anyway,
uh,
yeah.
yeah, the other kind of table setting question I wanted to ask is, yeah, this is a CRPG and it's also based on the D&D rule set, which has kind of fallen out. Like a lot of the more modern games like a Wasteland or a Pillars or even a Dragon Age Origins, like they kind of make their own new rule set, not based in D&D, whereas a lot of the classic ones were based directly off D&D. Even KOTOR was straight up D&D rules. Um, but and Baldur's Gate 3 is specifically D&D 5th edition. I know all of us have played Dungeons and Dragons in various forums over the years, and if you guys can just remind me, I've played a fair amount of Fifth Edition, and can you guys remind me if you guys have played much Fifth Edition specifically, or is it mainly the pre-Fifth Edition stuff that you played for D&D?
Well, I'm in a Fifth Edition campaign right now,
Okay.
and I played in Nate's campaign for a little bit. I was that. I think I was
Mm-hmm.
Bard. Yeah. And so I did a little bit of that. And then everything before that was fourth edition. And I probably played, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 campaigns of that.
Mm-hmm.
Most of my D&D, the lion's share of my D&D experience has been with fourth.
Gotcha.
Yeah, as far as actually playing the tabletop RPGs outside of like I think Baldur's Gate was based on 3.5 or something like that. So like the video games were kind of adaptations. I think I've only played what we played, which was I think fourth edition.
Yeah, that was fourth.
Is that okay? Yeah, so I haven't played fifth edition or even third edition, other than I was kind of exposed to the rule sets through those games. I guess one thing on that point that might be worth mentioning is, from what I could tell, like in what we played at fourth edition, there was a big push from the gameplay perspective to kind of codify the roles a bit more, almost like an MMO or other type of video game RPG, where you have like characters who are pretty well defined, like tanks and healers and damage dealers. Like the fourth edition rule set felt gameplay wise like it was kind of more in that direction than maybe like with 3.5. Like again, I didn't really play, but just from what I could gather, for example, like if you had a high level wizard, I think the joke is that you had like a second DM. The DM and the wizard would have to talk about like meta rules and things like that, just because the class could get so powerful and broken. And I think they really tried to rein that in future sets. Does that like sit with your understanding of?
Yeah, yes and no. So fifth edition actually is probably closer to 3.5 than it is to fourth edition. Fourth edition was actually not very popular. My understanding is they actually tried to make it more video game friendly, and then ironically, not really any video games got made off fourth edition. It didn't seem quite as well received by fans because it was a little more restrictive on the role playing side. Like the actual nuts and bolts of combat was a lot more detailed and had maybe more defined roles, like you're saying. But it was maybe a little less open-ended on the role-playing front. And so fifth edition kind of pivoted back a little bit and, in my opinion, found a pretty good balance between still having interesting combat mechanics and with some, technical number crunching there that could be interesting, but also still being pretty open for a lot of role-playing shenanigans in fun ways. And I think people have been much happier with fifth edition than they were with fourth in general, which I like fourth edition too. I like both fourth and fifth. And D&D...
There are a couple little things I have to shout out. Like
Mhm.
shift is not a mechanic in fifth edition. And, there are certain classes that gain the ability to do something equivalent to shift. And I don't know if shift made combat more interesting or less interesting, but I can say that all the time I'm wanting to shift in fifth edition and I can't, which is like the ability to move one space without provoking opportunity attacks as your movement, as opposed to disengaging and then that yanking your whole turn so you can kind of like get out of there. And I don't know, coming from fourth, it's hard with fourth being your first and then moving to fifth, because like fourth did like really do a lot of interesting strategic stuff with the combat that fifth kind of pulls back on. But I don't know, I'm just gonna be a little bitchy about that for a second.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I do agree that fourth is probably a hard one to start on, because in my experience, I've played third. I started with third, so I played third, fourth, and fifth. And fourth is by far the most different from the three. And it really does feel like they tried to pivot to more of like a strategy game than a role playing game, like a tactical combat first game. So yeah, there's some nice little tactical options that existed in fourth that just don't exist quite the same in fifth. But yeah, we should probably start talking about actual Baldur's Gate 3 proper. We've already said what classes we were. I was a gnome wizard. You guys were both fighters. Ryan was a human and Will was a dwarf, I think.
Yeah, a gold dwarf fighter. That's it.
Nice. What did the gold... So the gnome for me let me talk to animals, and I think maybe gave me another free cantrip or something. I forget. I mainly picked it because I could talk to animals for free. It just came with that. But do you remember what the gold gave you? If you don't, that's fine.
I was trying to look that up because I felt this question coming. I was like,
no worries.
what the hell do they do? Let's see. Okay, you get dwarven toughness. Your hit point maximum increases by 1 for every level that you have.
Okay.
So I think that's sort of the gold aspect of the dwarf.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Nice.
Anyway, that's it.
And humans are very versatile, as we know. That's a pretty big constant throughout every edition of D&D. You probably got like an extra perk choice or something like, or feat choice, sorry, something like that. I'm guessing.
Yeah, I was kind of confused at some points because I had like some odd proficiencies, and I would be looking through the menus and be like, where, because and fighters get proficiencies in like all weapons anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think I had like one extra specialization or something.
Yeah, that's usually how humans work, and you get a couple extra little just general selection of proficiencies or feats or things like that. But yeah, so how do you guys, here's kind of the first big question, how do you guys feel that, since we were just talking about D&D, how well do you think they were able to implement the D&D rules set within Baldur's Gate 3 for a video game? And it's not a one-to-one. They did make some alterations, but I mean, for the most part, it is straight up like 5th edition rule set. Do you feel like that worked? Did you like engaging with the D&D mechanics in a video game setting?
I think so. I mean, it always kind of creates some interesting stories in a way. It's interesting, and this is kind of I'm not gonna talk very long about this, but my friend is playing in our actual campaign. A friend of mine is playing like a wizard that he wanted to be kind of like tricksy, and very, very sly and very, very sneaky. And then the very first time he tried to like snap his fingers to like show a spark or something, it was kind of like this show he was kind of coming up with. He accidentally he rolled really, really low. I think it was like critical miss, and accidentally set the curtains on fire. And so then like his character became more of like a bumbling goof, like even though that wasn't necessarily his intention, like, and that he just kind of leaned into it. And so I think there are aspects of that with the D&D system where, it's interesting that the game can kind of do some of the storytelling for you in a weird way. But I guess maybe that's just D&D in general, but just something I think I noticed about the system.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right on both fronts. I think, yeah, that is D&D in general, but I also think it's cool that they were able to capture a lot of that in video game form, because I think that's kind of hard to do well in a video game when you can't like house rule stuff and have a reactive DM to like kind of roll with whatever with whatever happens.
Yeah.
But I mean, to me, playing this game, it feels like they accounted for a lot of possibilities, and even failure, it straight up shows the dice rolling on screen when you make rolls. And sometimes, or oftentimes, I've found that failure could have like I don't know, it could start like just like the example you were describing in your actual D&D campaign. Like, I thought failure in Baldur's Gate 3 could often like the results from that would end up just spawning its own interesting story or twist on things that would happen. And the game made it, I thought, pretty fun to just kind of roll with what happened. Like it kind of made it an interesting outcome regardless. Like even if you quote unquote failed like some kind of check or something you were trying to do. Maybe less true on some of the more mechanical things, like I don't know, picking a lock or something. But like for a lot of like the dialogue stuff, I thought, or like world interactivity stuff, I thought it could work pretty well.
That's actually one thing I have really mixed feelings about in the and I guess the broader question was like how well did they adapt D&D to a video game setting, which that one's but specifically on the point you're talking about of like the dice rolling, I have really mixed feelings about the dice challenges because as you mentioned, and this was one thing that popped up, like on one hand, I think the idea is that anything can succeed and anything can fail, right? That's kind of the premise of like in D&D is like you're going to try something and there's like a 5%, there's always a 5% chance that you critically succeed. And so you probably just it's like you just happen to get it right or whatever, but then there's always like a 5% chance that like you critically fail. And I guess in the D&D world, that can represent some kind of hilariously like silly or like catastrophic thing. Like you trip over your own feet and impale yourself with your sword or something like that. But in the context of Baldur's Gate 3, I feel like it actually was a design that the more I played, the more it led me to have to resist the urge to save scum. And there were definitely times where I just did. And like, on one hand, it's kind of cool and thematic and you roll with it. Sometimes it creates some interesting stories and I'll have some of those we'll get into. But like, on the other hand, like, there's always a 5% chance you'll fail at every single thing you do in the game. And, if I'm like playing a fighter and I have 20 points of strength, I've like invested all in strength and I fail a D10, that just gets old so quickly. And like, I had combats where I would roll 5 critical misses in a row, literally. And it's like, it's great that that's how statistics works, I guess. But, it's just like, it makes some situations just like kind of painful. So I don't know. I really don't know if I like that system overall. Like it's something I certainly wouldn't want to play in every game. I guess, this game is interesting enough and has interesting fail states that kind of help it. But I do feel like that design just in general, like kind of actively made me want to like save scum certain things.
Yeah, I guess at the same time, depending on it, it kind of depends on what you want too, I think, like you're saying. I mean, I think for a lot of people, that sort of emergent aspect is sort of like the selling point or like the idea that, you can't predict kind of how it's going to go, even if you are the rock trying to pick up a pick up a board, you can fail at it, so that kind of, I guess, kind of keeps you on your toes in a way. I don't really have a lot to say about it. I mean, I felt like it was a good implementation. The one thing that I actually is sticking in my head, and I think it's because it was one of the last things I did, and I guess we've already talked about, spoilers being on the table, but in the final encounter, I fought a red dragon. I think everybody did, maybe, but I hit that red dragon with an ability with my fighter. I don't know if I guess Ryan knows about these. The fighter gets access to this sort of special little suite of abilities that he or she can use by spending specific points. It's like 5 or 6 of these points that you can spend and do these attacks.
You were like a battle master, I think is what it's
yeah,
called.
yeah,
Okay.
and
as someone who played a battle master in actual D&D, yeah, those are the superiority dice that you spend.
There we are. There we are. So, well, look, don't correct me, jerk. Okay. I don't, sorry, I don't remember the name of the dice. Anyway, so I used those dice to do an attack that frightened that big red dragon. And when I looked at the red dragon, there was nothing in his description about like being immune to certain conditions, because certain people were immune to certain conditions. You'd see like a little passive on there when you looked at the description, but he didn't have anything like that. And I frightened him, and then he just flew across the map, and I was like frightened. Like even when you looked at him, it says frightened, and then you go to look at it, and it's like can't move, and I was like, what the hell?
You're
But
warrior, man. Just
you know,
intimidating a dragon.
right? I mean, I was like, what's going on? And it does say, like, at least it says legendary resistance 3 times a day. If the dragon fails a saving throw, it can choose to succeed instead. But it seemed like, paid attention more, but it seemed like a lot of statuses, you just had them for a certain number of turns. Like it wasn't so much about saving sometimes. But maybe there's a system that I was missing.
Yeah, so there's a lot of those things, I think, and I didn't encounter this specifically in Baldur's Gate 3 for that specific status, at least that I paid attention to. But in general, in 5th edition, a lot of or other editions too, but at the end of your turn, or beginning of your turn, maybe, basically every turn you can roll a save to be like, oh, am I still frightened? So
well,
maybe
he
that's
still had the frightened status on him when he was moving.
Okay.
So I don't know, but I mean, at the same time, I know he's supposed to be, a big badass, and so I could understand why they would, waive the rule on that. But I was like trying to keep him away from us because that thing could hit like a truck, man. That red dragon did not play games. But anyway, that was the only thing that comes to my mind when I'm thinking about like rules implementation and like rules sort of veracity,
Yeah, I do think there are some quirks for sure. I think, and in some cases they did make some changes with like certain spells, or like I think they even cut out some abilities or spells to try and make it fit. And yeah, I do think there are some quirks, and I think there are, like, I definitely ran into things similar to what you're describing, where like it wouldn't always make sense to me why something was behaving the way it was behaving. So I think there are definitely some quirks like that where it's just not always quite clear enough. I think overall, I did really appreciate the way things were implemented, and I think probably my favorite thing about this game as a whole is the way they have made it kind of more emergent. Like you mentioned, Will, is like it's almost feels like I don't know, like a quote unquote immersive sim in some ways, where it's like there's so many different ways pieces can fall in a given scenario, and
Flex,
it makes it feel like
immersive sim.
I'm sorry.
What's an immersive sim?
We are not going into that.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. But yeah, there's just so many ways to approach, and I think it's pretty impressive how open-ended they left a lot of things, just both in and out of combat, how you approach stuff, and it does kind of like it does in a lot of instances. I think it did for me at least, like impart that feeling of like, oh, like I am playing a D&D campaign, and I kind of, my mentality while playing a lot of this was like, okay, how would I approach this situation in like an more open-ended D&D campaign as opposed to a more rigid video game, and like, what weird wizard spells do I have? What can I use here to like affect something or do something? Like who in my party would be good at like sweet talking this person, or like, barging through this barrier, or, really thinking about the stuff in that way and how I wanted to approach stuff. And I thought for them, like, there's definitely some quirks, but I thought for the most part, like, they did a good job implementing that in a video game, and probably like better. I mean, I haven't played every game of this type, but for the ones I've played, it felt a lot more like adaptive and open-ended in how you approach things than any game of this type that I've played.
Indeed.
Before we kind of start talking about the axe and things, Mr. Will, you are your experience was a little different than mine and Ryan's.
That's true.
Correct me, Ryan, if I have this wrong, but I'm pretty sure. So I played this game solo. I'm pretty sure Ryan did as well. But Will, you did not. You played this game multiplayer.
Yeah.
So
I did with 3 other people.
Mm-hmm. So for me, and I'm guessing Ryan as well, like this felt like a, structure wise, it didn't feel that far afield from other games of this type. But how was the co-op experience for this game for you, Will?
Well, you already know the answer to this question.
I do, but our listeners need to know.
They need to know. That was actually depending on who you talk to, my my friend Tim, who played this with me, he feels that this is probably one of, if not his favorite game he's ever played. He really, really loved this. And, after we finished, he mentioned to me, he said, I just do not think that this is a good multiplayer game, and I could kind of co-sign on that a little bit. I think, there's emergence, right? And then there's also just sort of like chaos, and so I think that there's if you were to look at sort of a graph on it, it's like there's a sweet spot, like there's an emergent sweet spot that I think people who are going into these types of experiences, and maybe even the designers, sort of intended for the player to experience. It's like maybe you have this general arc, but maybe this thing didn't quite play out like you thought it would, or maybe you had to go about this another way than really you had planned on going it. But for a lot of our stuff, it just was kind of all over the place. And one of the things that I kind of mentioned earlier, when I did a little baby write up on this game, is that there are a lot of encounters in Baldur's Gate where the first person who's on the scene is the one who gets pulled into conversation. And sometimes you can back out of those conversations, and sometimes you can't. And sometimes the person who comes into the conversation will not be the person that you really want to do the talking, you know, and or the person who has the right skills. And then sometimes a skill check would be on you before you knew it. And one of the things that I'm not sure was I'm not sure if it was designed quite right, was that like it seemed like whenever I was getting into a skill check, once I was on the screen where you would actually roll a dice, I wasn't able to get sometimes I wasn't able to get any more boons or bonuses. So, if I had a party member with like bardic inspiration or some sort of something that would add a D4 to my roll, sometimes it wouldn't count those if I didn't get it cast on me until I got to the skill checks. Like once I was on the skill checks screen, you know. So that was a little bit wild,
Mm-hmm.
but also, and here's another thing that I have to kind of parse out, is that like I can't blame Larian for my dumbass friends. You know what I mean? Like that's something that I can't do. So,
Yeah.
for instance, some of the frustrations were, one of our party members was just for some reason absolutely obsessed with like making as much money as possible. And so every single encounter, they would pick up like everything. And then because they were our wizard, they were always full. They never had enough. They never really could hold that much. And then they were always trying to like find a vendor to sell it to. And I feel like we wasted so much time like waiting, like we'd be in an encounter and we'd be waiting on, Turd Ball to get done selling his shit so he could actually get back into combat with us. And there was one time where, he had done that, and then we got kind of locked into sort of an instance, and we had to like run out of this instance or like reload the game because he couldn't get in once we started the encounter. Like a bridge popped up, or we were in like a different area or something like that. And then like immediately after, I think Tim was able to dominate. I think the first time we encountered Gortash, is his name Gortash?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, first time we encountered him, Tim immediately hit him with dominate, and then Garrett immediately knocked him out of that dominate, and it was
Great.
just like it was
Perfect.
just so many. There's just so many messes like that.
Yeah.
And then of course there's the idea that, and this isn't a big deal, but I mean, the game doesn't. I mean, it lets you know subtly that someone else is in a conversation. Like you see a little ear on their icon, but that's
Mm-hmm.
all you really know. That's all. That's the only way you know if someone's actually talking to someone. And so, if someone wants to go talk to someone and make a dumb decision, then like you can't stop them if they're not going to tell you like what they're doing or what the options are, or you know what I mean. So there's I would suggest it's tough because I always find for me, unless it's a game like a Left 4 Dead or something, I very often find the sweet spot for me to be two people in co-op, and
Mm-hmm.
so I don't know what this would look like with two people. I may, especially hearing the praise that a lot of people whose opinion I respect hold, what kind of esteem they hold this game in. There may be a time that I come back and play it again, and so maybe I'll kind of experience it, with fewer players and kind of maybe more players who are less unhinged,
Uh-huh.
and see kind of how it ends up going. But yeah, that was I don't think it doesn't. I don't know. I guess it gives a lot of, it gives a lot of freedom, right? And that's both good
Mm-hmm.
and bad.
Yeah.
Like if you're playing a co-op game with somebody and it's like a linear third-person shooter, like if you're playing Gears with somebody, there's only so much they can goof up. I mean, they can they can be kind of slow or they can be kind of bad, but that's it. But then
Mm-hmm.
in a game that gives you so much freedom, like you were talking about earlier, there's so many different ways that you can approach every single situation. That's also an area where somebody, like every one of those is an area where somebody who is ridiculous can screw you over. So,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's sort of,
No,
yeah. I
no,
mean,
it
that's
makes
kind of
yeah,
where
makes
I'm at.
sense.
I guess that's just kind of where I'm at with it. So yeah, I don't know that it's the best. Also, a lot of the relationships that people have, like I think you mentioned to me, and we'll probably get into this more, but I think both you and Tim romanced Karlach, which I think must have been a very good, a very interesting, well written companion story or whatever. But when you're playing with four players, the only time you interact with your companions is in your camp. Like they're never with you when you're out doing anything. And so I think in some ways that makes some of the stories maybe less exciting or interesting or than they would be. But anyway, I'll leave it there. I won't keep talking about it. But those are some things that come to mind for me about the multiplayer experience.
Yeah, I do think one thing you said near the end there, that like the game offers so much freedom that like the multiplayer experience can kind of go any number of ways. Like I can simultaneously see how that can be frustrating depending on the people in your party, the other players. But I don't know. I think having not gone through that experience myself, so maybe I'm talking out my ass here, but I also think like that freedom is such a core part of this game that like you kind of can't give that up without, like, if there were more guardrails put up, like I have a hard time seeing how this game wouldn't be lesser for being more constrained. So like I think if they're gonna have multiplayer at all, like if they're gonna allow multiplayer, I kind of I kind of like that they just let it be, whatever the players make of it, and like still have that freedom in the multiplayer. And if you got some chaotic party members in your party, well then then your multiplayer experience might just be a mess.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, I hear what you're saying and I agree. But at the same time, I could ruin your Baldur's Gate 3 experience because I'm an expert at it now. I mean, I know exactly what to do to screw it all up.
Yeah.
So just that's a caveat.
So what you're saying is I shouldn't let you in my party because you know how to muck it up.
Or not that I will. I just don't want you to doubt that I can.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
All right.
I did actually play probably 10 to 15 hours multiplayer just with Nate, so there were just two of us.
Gotcha.
And
Gotcha.
Nate is a little more level-headed than it sounds like your group was. So
Yeah.
it was I would say it was a pretty, like, the multiplayer felt totally fine for us.
We had two people in our party, and this I don't mean to stigmatize, because it's not nice to stigmatize, and I'm a mental health professional, so I don't want to blame everything on this, but we had two people in the party who have ADHD diagnoses, and I don't know that didn't play any role in some of the strange decisions that they make when playing games. But anyway, we'll leave it there.
Yeah. All right, so I think it might be time to start talking about some anecdotes and stuff that happened in our journeys. Because one thing that's kind of tricky when talking about this game is, as we mentioned multiple times, like, it is so, like, you do have so much freedom in this game that everyone's experiences can be wildly different, which I think is super fascinating. And if it wasn't so long, I would immediately play it again to, like, see a different experience. But yeah, we thought we'd just kind of break this up by act. So we'll kind of start talking about quote unquote Act 1, which is up until you reach the Shadowlands. So this covers all the initial stuff on the beach. You actually get most of your main party members during Act 1. And then all the stuff around the Goblin Camp and the Druid Grove. And then you also have Act 1 has a lot of different locations. You also have the Mountain Pass, which has that, I forget what that place is called, but there's kind of like a religious place for the Githyanki, I think. And then there's also the Iron Forge. There's some like underground forge type thing. So like all of these locations are part of quote unquote Act 1. It's everything up until the Shadowlands. So we are definitely not going through everything beat by beat, but basically just kind of opening this up to what kind of stuff does anyone want to share and shout out here? Any kind of encounters, any kind of story beats or anecdotes or things that you found interesting and worth talking about? Is there anything in particular that stands out to you, Ryan, that you want to start us off here?
Yeah, well, I think in the first act, I learned that pretty much all of my party members were out to kill me. I think I had at least two of them literally put a knife to my character's throat.
Well, one of them was one of them when you first meet Asterion.
Yeah, so I'm halfway joking, but it was kind of funny because, this game definitely has like some interesting NPC relationship dynamics, but the way it kind of played out for me in terms of recruiting other characters is, so you fall out of the ship. I think you're with Shadowheart right at the beginning. And she's kind of the most level-headed. Like, she's pretty snarky about it, but she's like, hey, we're in the same boat, and like, we should work together. And I think, she's pretty abrasive and like, don't mess with me, don't ask me my secrets or whatever. But she's like, let's go find help, basically. So I run with her, and I think you find Lizelle, who's captured. And I chose to free her, which she puts a sword to your throat the first time you meet her. So like,
No, I don't know that she did for me.
In the airship, I think before you get out, I think she ambushes you somewhere along the way there. Right. But that turned into a whole saga because I kind of like Lizelle in some ways, but man, she could be a pain in the neck. And Shadowheart and Lizelle do not get along, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
So that, like, especially in the first act, I was like, man, I feel like I'm a babysitter or something. Like, these guys, like, they all hate me, they all hate each other, like, and we're all dying. So, like, everything is bad.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I did choose to bring Lizelle along, and then I met Asterion, which is funny because yeah, like depending on how the dialogue goes, he's like, "Hey, look over there," and I'm like, "Sure, why not?" And yeah, he like grabs you from behind and puts a knife to your throat or whatever. And so when that happened, I rolled a strength check, and um, my character did a headbutt and like
Mm-hmm.
kind of knocked him off of me. And then I told him to like basically to hit the road. um, so I did not recruit Asterion. I just
Oh
told him
wow.
to get lost. Um, but yeah, it's funny because after that, I actually missed the other characters. So I actually had to come back through to recruit
Okay, so but you did end up
Dale.
getting them later.
Yeah, I did end up getting them later, but it was funny because yeah, in that first scene, like some of the recruitments, like Lizelle, Asterion, I think Will even is kind of hostile towards you when you first meet him. Um, Plus, then there's like this whole scene in the campfire where Shadowheart and Lizelle are fighting, and there's another scene where Lizelle's like, "I'm not going to let us all turn," and you wake up and she's about to cut your throat, and it's like, oh my goodness, it's like these people who are supposed to be my party members are all out to kill me.
Yeah.
uh,
I don't think I got that with her cutting my like threatening to cut my throat in the camp. Um,
yeah, I
but
don't
yeah,
know what triggered it, but straight up.
I do actually appreciate this was a thought I had playing the game. I appreciate that of those like core six party members, they kind of run the gamut of like personality types and like the types of choices they want to make and like that it can lead to that tension there and they will also like rebuttal what you want to do. So like I parts of the game early on, I had Lae'zel and Asterion in my party, and I was playing like a mostly good character. And those two definitely have some tendencies where like they want to do the not good thing. Um, and they'll like they'll kind of argue with you a little bit. They'll be like, "That's not what I would do," or like and you can kind of like gain or lose favor with them. Um, so I do kind of appreciate that they like kind of create those dynamics. And yeah, your party members will fight. They'll they'll threaten you.
Yeah, Lizelle is kind of an epic too in a way because she was one of the biggest pains in the neck for a lot of the game, but also like the way the story played out with her ended up being one of the more interesting. I don't know, Shadowheart had a really cool arc too.
Yeah.
But like you said, because she's kind of resistant to the but the other thing is that, she was she was usually very honest, and so like being honest with her was usually a good way to go. And like uh she also respected strength. So a lot of times, when other people started giving me lip, like I would just use an intimidate or something like that. That's like, I was a fighter and I wasn't like really gonna go around like sweet talking people. So like, sometimes that would win like brownie points with Lizelle.
Hmm.
Um, but then
Yeah.
like, she in Act One, I guess it was Act One, she drags you into the what you mentioned, the Githyanki camp, which is in the like a monastery of the Rising Sun or whatever I don't remember exactly what they call it, but she drags you there. And I was like, all right, I'm going along with this, but I think, we've got this artifact and we're all going to do like, um, she insists that you go visit the Githyanki camp.
Hmm.
And I'm like, well, all right, I guess I'll do this. But like, they really want this thing and they're willing to kill anybody to get it. So like, uh,
Hmm.
so yeah, that was a whole like saga.
Yeah. Yeah, I also found some of the characters kind of annoying at the start, including Lae'zel, but I agree that like by the end, Astarion I found really annoying at the start. I'll talk more of them when we are in the Act 3 section, but yeah, I think a lot of the way their stories evolved and wrapped up were pretty compelling.
Yeah.
So kind of the big set piece dynamic or one of them at least, for Act 1 is the whole Druid Grove and Goblin Camp dynamic. First, quick question. Did either of you murder the Druid Grove, first of all?
You mean all of the goblins?
So,
Not all the goblins.
did you murder the goblins?
Yes.
Okay. Because you
But
can, there's a route you can go.
I think we found Halsum in there or something.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And kind of walked out with him, and and then we murdered all the goblins. That's pretty much what happened.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, because there is another route you can go where you can kind of side with the goblins, so to speak, and you can you can wipe out the druids. I assume both of you, like most players, killed the goblin leaders, but I was just double checking to see if anyone killed the druids.
Well, it's funny you say that because the goblin lady, whatever her name was,
Yeah, Minthara.
I think it had she had a weirder name.
Yeah, and I mean
Minthara is the dark elf, right?
Yeah, she's not a goblin, but she is one of the 3 that you have to kill in the goblin camp if you go that route. And she is a potential party member if you side with the goblins.
Yeah. Well, there was some goblin lady, and she had some sort of interesting name. I can't remember her name. But anyway, she was one of the ones who was like gonna try and get you to she's like, "Hey man, I can hook you up with a cure for that parasite." And I went and I was like trying to take her up on it. And then she locked me in a dungeon. You know what I mean? So
wait, was that the swamp hag that you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about but the swamp hag also felt like she could help you with the problem. God, it's something weird like the seer or something weird like that. I'm trying to remember that name, but yeah, so I went in there and and she's like, "I can help you with this." And I was like, "Sure, okay." So I like followed her through it, and then she, it was kind of like I was alone for my whole party while this whole thing was happening. And then she locked me up in this dungeon, and I had to I think I overcame some strength checks or something to break myself from the shackles. And then there were like 2 ogres out there, and I ended up getting flattened, during that encounter, reduced to 0 HP. But the rest of my party came down there and bailed me out. And in my mind, I was like, you would think that the goblin lady would be kind of evil. But I was hoping that, I mean, maybe she could just overcome it. Like, wouldn't it be great if she just cured my parasite and then we became friends? But, the goblin lady was just as evil as I anticipated. And so I don't know. I started thinking to myself, wondering if the alignment, because I think if you look in the D&D monster manual, goblins are like evil alignment. And so it's like, I got to thinking, I was like, can these creatures act outside of their alignment? I mean, I guess the emperor is evidence that they can, but certainly that goblin lady, that goblin doctor priestess lady, did not act outside of her alignment. So anyway,
Yeah, I did.
Your gold dwarf fighter was just too gullible.
Mm-hmm.
Doctor, the goblin, you just meet a goblin, and she's like, "I've got some candy."
Yeah, yeah. And I was
Follow
like,
me into
wouldn't it be
this
great?
suspicious-looking
Wouldn't it be
dungeon.
great if she could rise above her alignment? But she couldn't. Tricky.
I agree. That would be great.
Mm-hmm.
I did. In the goblin camp, I did talk to some spiders down there and convince them to help me kill the goblins.
I like it. I like it.
I actually have more stuff in later acts that for me personally that I want to dig into more. I guess I'll shout out like a couple things that were interesting in my run or that stood out to me, I guess, in Act 1. I
True
thought
Soul Gut. That's her name. Gut.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that was one of the 3 targets you had to kill if you were going that route.
Yeah.
Which some of those fights were actually pretty tough.
Yeah, like I said, I got flattened after she locked me in a dungeon because there were like 2 ogres outside, and happens when you're like before you're like level 5 or something. So
yeah,
it's really rough.
yeah. Which in general, I actually some of the hardest parts of the game to me were in Act 1 because I think just those lower levels you're a little squishier and things can be a little tougher. But yeah, I killed one of the goblins. The one actually in back first. I kind of snuck into the back, and that first fight was the hardest one by far. I forget which that one's named. Is the one who's not Minthara and not Gut. It's the third one. And then Minthara actually
tiefling, the tiefling guy. He's like a tiefling barbarian.
Maybe. I don't quite remember. He was almost in like a throne room looking area and had a bunch of people surrounded him, and there were also some rafters up top.
Yeah, I think he like goes berserk. He's I think a barbarian, and he uses like rage. I remember that fight. I think I didn't convince the spiders, but I succeeded in shoving him down into the spider pit.
Nice.
And then he just like, he was in his barbarian rage and just like one-shotted them with his giant club. I knocked him down there, and then the spiders attacked him, and he just like turned around and smashed them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that fight I did think was pretty tough. The Minthara fight, I ended up pushing a lot of people down the pit, which shoving in general in this game is just pretty great. And then I found Halsin, who helped me in the last fight. One fight in Act 1 outside the Goblin camp was it's like some kind of spider queen or matriarch in like these spider caves. That was a pretty hard fight. I had to use the terrain a lot in that fight as well, like pushing a lot of things off. I had Shockwave that I used a lot in the early game. There was, speaking of shoving, there was, I can't remember what the like the underground in the underworld area. That was in Act 1 where a lot of the gnomes are like
The Underdark.
Yes. But you get down there and there's a big fight with someone, and I ended up going a route where I was like supposed to get their head. And I stumbled my way into like a ridiculously huge fight with just like tons of guards and stuff around, and like kind of felt unwinnable. And I ended up just pushing like a bunch of people into a lava pit and I just got incinerated. And that was basically like the only way I could figure out how to win that fight. This was kind of the period of the game where I was like really kind of wrapping my head around like just all the options you had in combat during that period.
That was the fight with
the Grim Forge. That's what it was called.
Crusoe Near. Looks like his name was.
Yes.
There's like a big confrontation with him because you're trying to get through like a cave-in or something, and he shows up and is like ordering people around.
Yes. Yep, that was the fight. Yeah, I basically just confronted him straight up, which was maybe a little a little ambitious. And yeah, we just got like super overwhelmed by like just tons of his minions or allies, and really had to use the environment. And that was definitely a Stark encounter, and that's in the Grim Forge. That's what that area was called. And that was definitely a Stark encounter of like, all right, like if you walk into bad situations, like it can be bad, and you gotta figure your way out of there. And I did so by
pushing was magical. I got to say,
pushing was pretty magical, for sure. The encounter in that monastery as well that Lae'zel takes you to was also pretty intense. There was a pretty tough fight at the end of that little mini dungeon. That was pretty intense. So I think weirdly enough, a lot of my main memories, other than just like getting used to the mechanics and getting introduced to a lot of the characters, I think a lot of my big memories from Act 1 actually are like big encounters that I found myself getting into that like I kind of really had to use all my wits to survive, which was both a little stressful but also pretty fun, and once I got through them.
Yeah, and I guess I will say also, especially in Act 1, as both of you mentioned, I thought it was pretty challenging. This is a part where I felt like, for as flexible as Baldur's Gate 3 kind of is or purports to be, it's pretty flexible. But I did find that, and classic CRPGs were kind of this way too, where like it rewards you for trying to do everything. Like, because at the very beginning of the game, I mentioned that I missed party members, like, and part of that was just because, like, I was like, okay, well, we're supposed to go find a cure, and we need to head off in this direction, and so I didn't really stop to like engage with a lot of people, like try to do side quests or like explore the map, and I actually ended up like all the way in the back of the goblin camp. Like I was able to kind of make my way there through some like a few encounters and some intimidation checks, but I only had 2 party members and I was like level 3.
Oh, wow.
And
Yeah.
there was just like no way I could take on that. Like, I was like, well, I'll just kill if I could kill this boss, like, and then like there's a gate behind him, like maybe I can find a way to like break through this gate. But yeah, really like it's a combination of things. Like you're kind of supposed to like engage with the quests, like reach a higher level, like, find Halson, like find your other party members. Like you really need kind of like all your tools in your tool belt to be able to do that. Plus you mentioned like in Act 1, technically you can go through like the Mountain Pass or the Underdark, but really it's better if you just do both, which is what I eventually did. Because if you go through the Underdark and Grimforge, you can get like the adamantine equipment, which is a fighter, was just amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you go through the Mountain Pass, you can get like the Blood of Lathander, the like legendary mace, and some other things. And so like, eventually I was like, well, really like this game is kind of hard, and like rather than just progressing to Act 2, like I really should just try to do every side quest I can find and like make sure I'm not missing any like high level equipment or useful side stuff or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a game where in its open-endedness you can totally just like, yeah, like you said, end up with only 2 party members in the back of the goblin camp at level 3, and it's like, yeah, it's like, I don't know, you can kind of get into all sorts of situations like that. I was fairly methodical and felt like I found a lot of stuff pretty quickly. I also like, I feel like I got all the party members like really quickly. Um, and I also did a lot of weaving back and forth. So like if one area seemed a little tricky, I would kind of like pick a different quest or a different direction and then go do something else first. Which I think helped a little bit because you're definitely able to stumble into some higher level encounters surprisingly early in Act 1. I actually thought the game got easier as it went, which I'm sure we'll talk about that later. Um, but yeah, you can definitely like stumble into some wild stuff in what feels like a little too soon.
Yeah. Did you end up doing both areas or did you
Yep.
primarily
Yep.
stick to one? Okay.
No,
Did
I
you
did.
go into the Githyanki camp?
Yeah. Um,
Okay.
I guess I
Did you
don't know
meet
what you
Blacken?
mean specifically by the camp.
It's like under the monastery.
Oh yes,
It's where
I did. I had totally forgotten about that. Yes, I did go in there, and there was something
uh
I was trying to get out of there, and I got all the way into the back room where the person I was supposed to, who had the thing I was trying to get was. I forget what the MacGuffin was.
were you trying to
Um,
get an egg or something?
maybe. And I got into a real rough situation and a real rough combat encounter, like after because I was like on peaceful terms with him, like walking through all the hallways, and I took Lazelle with me, figuring that would help because she's Githyanki. Um, and I got all the way in the back there and somehow triggered a fight. I think I like tried convincing or doing something, and couldn't get through the series of rolls needed or whatever it was. Um, and ended up starting a fight that was pretty rough, but managed to get through. Yes, I totally forgot about that. The
Did Did you meet Vlakith?
was Vlaka was Vlakas herself in that fight? There's like a fight at the end of the monastery, and there was a gosh, there's so many characters in this game. Like I can't remember the name of the like I remember like seeing a vision of Vlakith, or like a apparition appear.
Okay.
And I
Okay. So you did. Okay.
yeah, and I defied Vlakith, and I had to fight all of her. And I ended up going
Yeah.
inside the artifact for some reason at that point. Um, I forget why, but yes, I did have a big encounter there. After speaking with Vlakith.
Okay. Yeah. And that's part of it. I think like that whole section was funny to me though. Yeah, because Lizelle, like, I went there because Lizelle insisted on it, like that kind of being part of her story, and like she marches you like all the way into the heart of it,
Mhm.
and you meet that like director lady or whoever, and I think I had to roll some kind of check, like a deception or something, there, like to not have to fight her right away. But then, uh, or maybe I don't know, maybe I failed and I had to fight her anyway. But yeah, you end up in like the heart of, and I don't think there's any way you can part with the artifact. You can't just hand it over even if you wanted to. But yeah, I think I chose to defy Blocketh, and like you're like in the middle of this Githyanki war camp and
Yep.
everybody turns hostile.
Yep. Yep. I had a
Yep,
similar experience there.
that's how it goes.
Yeah. That was actually the last place I went in Act One. So I was maybe a little bit better off by that point. I had already done all of the Underdark and the Grim Forge and all of that.
Okay, yeah, I think I might have done that path before the Grim Forge. I'm not 100% sure about that.
Hmm. Um, yeah, that was around the time where I discovered that haste is very good, and I would cast the haste spell on Lazelle, who was level 5 by that point, so she could get 3 attacks a turn, and that was pretty good.
Oh, nice. Every time
Or,
I used haste, because haste is a concentration skill, like somebody
Mhm.
would break the concentration, and so I'd get like a turn of haste, and then it would all be lethargy after that.
Mhm. Yeah, that was pretty. I mean, I definitely had concentration broken sometimes, but I was usually pretty good about protecting. My character was the mage, the wizard. I was usually pretty good about dealing with that, but yeah, sometimes it's hard to avoid getting that broken. All right, is there anything else we want to mention in Act One, or are we ready to move on to Act Two stuff?
It took us so long to get through the game. I do remember, like, I keep hearing little bits and pieces of things that sound familiar. I do remember going to try and find some sort of egg, and there was some sort of big Githyanki camp, and it did seem like there was a whole bunch of people there. But I can't remember kind of who we talked to or what we did. I remember there being some portrait down there that like you could burn or something like that. But but yeah, it's very foggy when I think
Yeah.
back to Act One. I think that was like, a couple months ago now, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. For me, this was like August, September, early September. So it's been a few months. All right. Well, yeah, let's maybe go ahead and talk about Act Two a little bit. So Act Two is it's the spooky part of the game. It's the whole Shadowland area, which I think my first immediate thought of Act Two was like, man, Shadowheart's really feeling like the main character of the game right now, huh? Because I mean, I guess Will, you didn't experience this, but uh, yeah, she feels very central in Act Two.
It is funny because whenever I was kind of zooming out and trying to remember what was going on in Act Two, and there are some sub stories, but really like uh, Shadowheart and um, Shadowheart really mostly. I'm trying to think of other character stories. Like I guess Halson has some connection to the Act Two. Jahira, meeting Jahira was kind of interesting, but yeah, like that's kind of like more than a lot of the other stuff that was going on. It's like I remember like Shadowheart and Jahira in Act Two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like kept being like, okay, eventually Shadowheart's usefulness is going to wear out, right? But it's like, no, you're fighting so many undead and type of enemies, and Shadowheart is a cleric, and especially if you got that Mace of Lathander, was that the one that like just permanently gave you like a light source coming off you?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like I had that on her, and it's just like she was just constantly like blinding things and able to turn undead, and she was just very powerful. That whole act, and
Yeah.
then the way the act ends, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, but yeah, it's like she's seen like there was definitely a point in Act Two where I'm like, it almost felt like they wrote this game up, at least that part of the game, with like Shadowheart being the main character in mind.
It's funny too because like you were talking about the blood of Lathander, and that feels like such a cheat code for Act Two because one of the big mechanics for it is like if you get in the darkness, like there's some kind of like horrible penalty that starts damaging your characters or something, like the whole shadow curse thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you're supposed to get like the fairy lantern or whatever to protect you. But really, if you just have the blood of Lathander, like you always have a free light source that's like on a
Mm-hmm.
weapon that blinds shadows and undead, which a lot of the enemies in that chapter are like shadows or undead.
Yes.
Um, so like
Yeah.
it's like you can kind of just ignore that whole side mechanic if you went through the like get the quest to get the kind of legendary mace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, like I mean, every act was long, and I was very methodical and very completionist with my entire playthrough of this game. But Act Two was definitely the one that felt like it just went the quickest and the smoothest and was the easiest for me. And I feel like a lot of that really was just like you said, that Blood of Lathander just felt like a cheat code. I kept thinking they were gonna like subvert it in some way and like make that not so work on everything, but it pretty much worked on most things throughout the whole that whole act. Um, and another thing that's interesting to me about Act Two is like Act One was actually pretty diverse. Like you had the goblin stuff, you had the mountain pass, you had the Underdark, you had all of the uh, Auntie Ethel stuff, which we didn't really dig into, but like that was a whole thing. Like there's a lot of different stuff going on in Act One. Act Two felt a lot more focused. It was like, okay, we are focused on all of the build up to Moonrise Towers and like all of the oh, what were there were basically like a handful.
Harpers or
No, there
the
were enemies.
Harpers or the enemies.
Yeah, there was like a whole um, there's like a whole it's like they all had the same last name or something. There were like all these mini bosses that were like kind of related. Um, I'll
This
figure out
was
their
in
names eventually.
this was in Act Two.
Thorm. Yeah, there were like a bunch of characters with the last name Thorm. There was like a doctor one. There was the, I mean, obviously the main boss there. But
Oh,
and there,
is this tied to Ketheric's family somehow?
yeah. So like there was the Toll Keeper boss. I have their names up now. Garengoth Thorn. Then there was the doctor, Malice Thorm, and then there was like the bartender guy, Thizabald Thorm. And they were just like mini
That's funny.
bosses, like scattered around Act 2.
I didn't even realize those guys all shared the last name.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure I fought all of them, but I didn't realize they were all like part of that plan or whatever.
Yeah. Which they were all interesting fights, I thought. The the Toll Keeper fight was ridiculous because like it had a move. They had a move that would deal damage proportional to the amount of money you had on you, and
Oh yeah,
they absolutely just one-shotted me. And then
yeah,
I had to reload because they just wiped me, and I then I like went back to camp and deposited all my money in the chest.
yeah. I think like I don't remember exactly because my main character was a fighter, or maybe I had spent some of my money, or like you said, put it in the like. But yeah, like my main character carried the money, and either she killed me or like, and maybe it didn't kill me because I was like, but I was like, man, that hit crazy hard. But like you said, that whole fight was themed around money, so it's like I had to figure that out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But other than the final area of Act 2, I don't know that I have a lot of standout moments. Meeting the Harpers and Jahira, like you said, was a nice moment. And it was interesting trying to get the protection from the darkness.
Is
Um,
Balthazar in flesh in that act? Or no?
Who was that?
yes, he is. Yes, that's a good point. Yeah, that whole Temple of Shar area, which was a pretty big area. Um,
Yeah, the
That
Dark Justiciar trials.
yeah.
mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that we ended up fighting him, uh Balthazar, and he for a while there he had given me that whistle so I could call in his little flesh buddy, which I thought was pretty fun.
Mhm.
But I ended up finishing that fight because you fight him out in some sort of weird void when you finally like confront him, and I just pushed him off the top of it. And the funniest thing is I guess just to be not a bitch, I'm not gonna say the name of the party member that was giving us so much trouble, even though you guys probably both know. But he said, "Oh no, but what about his stuff?" As soon as I pushed him off the top, and I was like, "Shut up!" Like we just totally cheesed the hell out of fight, and that probably was going to be difficult. And I was able to just get up there and like, one of my superiority dice had a move that would push an enemy, and I could either push him with a ranged attack or a melee attack, and I was able to kind of push him off the side. And I just thought that was a pretty fun way to beat a boss, for me.
Mhm.
But
And that fight you're talking about is actually right before you have to choose with night about Night Song, right? Like that's when you meet Night Song. Like you fight Balthazar, he's got the Azamar, she's chained up, and you kind of have to make a decision whether to set her free or kill her.
oh yeah, and
Mhm.
she was cool. So I don't know.
Yeah. Did anyone? So I set her free. Did anyone kill her?
So it's interesting
And that's the
because
one that's tied to Ketheric, right?
yes,
Like that's how Ketheric
he's
gets
like,
his immortality, right?
yeah, he's borrowing it from her.
What a cheater! Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because in that instance, Shadowheart actually, she has, I think, the spear, like the spear that Shar gives her, and
Mhm.
I didn't try to intervene. I was like, you know, I trust you, like just because I kind of didn't want to kill her, but I was also like, well, this is kind of like Shadowheart's. She's gone through all these trials, and like this is what she feels like is her life's goal. So I was like, I'm not gonna like jump in and like uh try to stop her. But it's interesting because she independently like decided not to kill her.
Mhm.
Um, so I don't know. Did you feel like you were intervening and like trying to sway her, or did you just kind of let it play out?
Um,
Uh,
a, a little of both. So like by that point in the game, um, I'm going to kind of ask party composition stuff when in a little bit, but Shadowheart had been in my party the entire game, like kind of as my support and healer type character. But my relationship with her was really good. Like if you went and looked in her character sheet, like I was all the way on the positive side. Which the way this game works means you can you kind of have pretty decent influence over the characters. But like you, I still wanted it to kind of be her choice because this was actually this was a really big moment in her character arc. Um, and I think I might have said one or two little things, kind of like because like you, I didn't really want to kill Night Song. Um,
yeah,
so I think I said one or two little things hinting that like, hey, maybe there's another way, or maybe this isn't the right way. But I remember there being some like pushier options, and I remember not going that route because I did want it to be her decision. But it sounds like our scenes played out similarly because yeah, Shadowheart of her own volition chose to not kill Night Song, like threw away the spear, which means she denounced Shar, and that was like a whole big change in her character arc.
yeah. I really like the way that played out, and you know, I guess if she had killed Night Song, it'd have been like, well, I guess you're a dark justiciar now. Like, I hope you don't stab me in the back or whatever.
Yeah, I'm
Well,
really curious what that looks like.
but at that point in the game, I barely knew who Shadowheart was.
Yeah, I was
Like
gonna ask.
yeah, I don't even. I mean, I don't even think I could pick Shadowheart out of a lineup. So
Yeah, I was gonna ask how that scene with Night Song went for you, Will. Like, I don't know, was it
oh,
just like, hey, do you like was it a conversation with Night Song and like Night Song was trying to convince you? Because like in my conversation, and I assume Ryan's as well, like Shadowheart, it was basically a conversation between Shadowheart and Night Song. But I guess in your game, Will, it was the Night Song just trying to convince you and Shadowheart just not in the picture at all.
well, I mean, nobody was really trying to convince. I mean, there wasn't a lot of convincing. It was like we got to her, and they were like, and for me, it was like, do you want to free this slave that this idiot has been mooching off of? And I was like, let's free her.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. There was
That was it.
no
Okay.
there was no deeper connotation to any of it, really. I was just like, and
Yeah.
maybe,
Actually, that's interesting. Do you even like, because she's like, she kind of can't die, right? She's an Azamar. Like,
mm,
I don't know if you can like part of that is interesting. I didn't think about it because part of Shadowheart's storyline is you go through this quest and get a spear, like this. You get this spear like that she specifically wants you to use to kill. Uh, Night. Like I don't even know if I suppose maybe you could find a way to kill her otherwise, but maybe it's like not even a choice if you don't have the spear of Shar or whatever it was called.
yeah. Uh, I don't remember the Spear of Shar, but
And I
maybe,
guess that's one of the interesting little like lore subplots, that
yeah.
this game and it probably has an answer, right? Like it's like, if you don't have the spear, you don't have Shadowheart, maybe it's like you can't even possibly kill this character. Or maybe you can.
I
Um,
don't know.
it's just
Yeah.
interesting. Like that's probably something that the game addresses.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Could be. Could be. Could
Yeah,
happen.
yeah, that is super interesting. And yeah, that whole scene I thought that whole scene was really well done. Like that was like, I mean, the game had a lot of like fun story moments and like, I don't know, just things that can happen kind of emergently as we've been talking about. Um, that night song scene was, I, I think the first like one that was for me that was like, this was felt like a really well done like cinematic type moment, if that makes sense. Um, just like the way the
like a
scene was.
payoff.
Yeah, it was like a really big story moment for Shadowheart specifically, and like the way the music and like the framing of the scene and like the dialogue and like just all of it kind of came together to produce this like really, I thought, really powerful story moment. I mean, Shadowheart is straight up denouncing this god she's been following her entire life. And I thought they did that justice. And then you have Night Song like flying to Moonrise Towers, being like, "All right, time to go kick butt and defeat Ketheric and all that." Um, it kind of felt like a lot of the things because Act One didn't really have like a final showdown, so to speak. It just kind of rolled right into Act Two. But this moment felt like, okay, a lot of the stuff we've been building to is like coming to this moment, this confrontation, and then you go storm Moonrise Towers. Um,
Yeah, I think I guess another thing too. You were talking about like Ketheric actually. Um, he felt like a pretty interesting villain. Like I think Act Two is where you first see Ketheric, and you see him like I think it's like he gives the goblin a weapon and tells it to attack him,
mhm.
and it
Yeah.
like cuts it like it puts a huge gash in him, and he just like pulls it out and is like, yeah.
Hmm.
Um, and then when you confront him, like he kind of turns into an avatar of, I guess, Merkul.
Yeah.
Um, that was a pretty cool showdown.
Hmm. Yeah, that whole like assaulting the Moonrise Towers, like I convinced Jahira to fight with us and like a lot of the Harpers as well. So like kind of going in through that front door, um, and just fighting through the tower, like I thought that was a real good kind of little set piece section. Um, and yeah, they did good character work and introduction with Ketheric, who is voiced by J.K. Simmons, if you were not aware. Um, the other thing that was interesting was like trying to free people from the prison in Moonrise Tower. Free? Did you guys do that? There were like a lot of people in prison down there. Did you free all of them?
Who was in prison?
There were some
Uh,
gnomes. There were some like a lot of the dark hand gnomes, I think maybe.
they actually show up in Act Three too if you help them.
Mm-hmm.
Which,
Yeah.
yeah, I did. I think free basically. I think one of the tieflings from, or some of the tieflings from the Druid Grove are also
Mm-hmm.
down there.
Yeah, they were.
I don't
Uh,
think I don't remember that. So maybe we didn't.
yeah, so I was about to say, it sounds like you maybe didn't free these, or
Yeah.
honestly, they may have died before then anyway, because like a lot of those are characters you meet earlier in the game, and were already in precarious situations that they may not have survived from.
Ah, okay.
You first meet what's his name, Barkus, the gnome. You first meet him most likely tied to a windmill in Act One.
Oh, was he one of those?
Yeah.
That is funny. The guy tied to the windmill.
Yeah.
I don't think we
I'll
saw
have more to.
him.
I'm sorry, Will.
I said I don't think we saw him.
Oh, okay.
I feel like we were. Although I do feel like we got less and less thorough as we went on.
Mhm.
At the beginning, I think there was sort of like, well, we're having a good time, But then after a while, I think some of us were just like, okay, let's wrap it up, because
Mhm.
it's a long game.
It's a long
So
game, yeah.
yeah, and so I think that was kind of where we were at. But yeah, we did. I don't remember seeing that person, the guy tied to the windmill. So
I'll have more to say about him in Act 3 because I really liked how his story wrapped up.
okay,
If he manages to survive. But yeah, you first meet him. Goblins have like tied him to a windmill in the goblin like near the goblin camp in Act 1, and they're just like torturing him basically.
really,
Um, but the last question I kind of had about Act 2, and if you guys have anything else to shout out about Act 2, but and this is kind of a combo for Act 1 and 2, but we hadn't really talked about party composition. Will, I know you were, with 4 human players, so your party was static the whole game. You were a fighter. What were your other 3 party members? What were they playing
we
as?
had a bard, a cleric, and a wild magic. I guess is a wizard or sorcerer or something. Wild, whatever the wild magic one was.
Sorcerer would be the
Right.
wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was the ones we had.
Okay. Were
Yeah.
were the bard and the cleric? Did they do a lot of melee, or were they more like spellcasty oriented?
So
Because you
Tim
can. Those,
played the bard, and he mostly just dropped cloud of daggers everywhere he possibly could. That was kind of
okay.
what his role was. And the cleric, um, kind of sucked. I don't know. He didn't do much. Like
Okay.
I feel like the fighter and the bard, because of that cloud of daggers, and the wild magic mage who was over here just like hawking fireballs at everything, they were kind of doing all the damage. And then the cleric sort of just served as a little bit of a target, mostly. But really, I was the main target because I was the fighter and I was in the
Mhm.
shit. So
Yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah.
that ended up being, I think, kind of the comp, you know.
hmm
So
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty good comp. Yeah, and yeah, I imagine you're the frontline melee person, and the sorcerer is going to be in the back. But cleric and bard are interesting because they can be spec'd a lot of different ways. So um, I wasn't sure how they acted for you.
yeah,
Um,
I don't
yeah,
know. Every once in a while, Tim would do a song. He was the bard, but I
mhm.
don't remember. I don't remember him doing a ton of the songs. And every time he
Yeah,
did it, it was kind of like, well, there's nothing else to. Maybe there was nothing else to do, you know.
yeah.
And but yeah. Anyway,
Did he get a lot of donations by performing?
um, I don't think so.
Okay.
You know,
There's a
I mean,
really
we were.
goofy. So the little bit I played with Nate co-op, I was a bard,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
you can like just play a song anywhere. So like if you're like in the Druid Grove and like just start playing a song, like people will like if you pass your performance check, people will walk up to you and like toss money on the ground at your feet, which is really funny.
That's pretty good, but I don't remember us doing any of that, but that
Okay.
is funny.
I just shared a screenshot in our chat that is in Act 1 me using Cloud of Daggers that Will was talking about, just creating a massive body of things that we're
Yeah,
trying to walk through.
Cloud of Daggers was so incredibly sick. And
Yeah.
then the thing is, like, I was pretty good at moving guys around, and so he would drop that thing in like a choke point, and then if
Mhm.
someone actually got through it, I would like knock them back into it, like
Yep.
with my fighter. So
Yep.
yeah,
If you had a good
sick.
choke point, that spell was pretty great.
Hmm.
I don't remember if I used Cloud of Daggers at all.
Yeah.
I did
I
have a
found it.
wizard, but
Uh,
must have missed it. It
yeah,
was that like a level? Because what
it's a
level
level two.
spell was that?
It's a
You
level
can
two
cast
spell.
you can cast it at higher levels, and it seems to be nastier.
hmm
I think you can cast it with a higher level spell slot.
Yeah, most damage spells, if you cast up, they will deal more damage. But yeah, it was a level 2 spell. So like you get it if you're a wizard, you get it at like level 3 or 4, I think. Character level 3 or 4. But yeah, like
Don't-
there are definitely some choke points I use it on, and it's just like enemies just walking through there getting chewed up. So what was your
That's
main
pretty
party?
cool.
Oh, sorry, Ryan.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So what was your main party composition through this part of the game, at least the first two acts?
So for
Right.
a lot of the game, I started mixing this up in more in Act 3. Like I started experimenting, and maybe Act 2 as well after I got Jahira. But for a big part of the game, I had my character who was a human fighter champion, and actually a dual wielder, which I think this is technically not min-max because it felt like maybe, fighters did a little better with two-handed weapons. But it was fun.
I think I had
I
a
also
shield the
would,
whole time. I don't know.
yeah, or you could spec like for tankiness, like more sword and board tank.
Right.
It was kind of neat because I could, for my ranged weapon, I used dual hand crossbows. Um,
Oh, nice.
because hand crossbows are one-handed weapons, so I would get
Mhm.
the offhand attack with. That was kind of a neat little
Tim
thing.
was always looking for one of those. I think he saw that interaction that you're talking about in his single player game. And then the whole time we were playing multiplayer, he's like, "Has anybody seen a hand crossbow? Has anybody seen it?"
Yeah, it took me a
No.
while to find, but I remember holding on to them because I was like, I'm so spec'd into dual wielding that if I can, I don't even know if this will work, but if it does, like I'm totally putting these hand cross, and it sure did. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the disadvantages of so there are two big disadvantages of dual wielding. One is that your offhand attack uses your bonus action, so no pushing or jumping, which is actually a pretty huge disadvantage, especially since your fighters have like, some of your highest athletic score.
Right.
But also, in the late game, you get like 3 or 4 basic attacks, but that doesn't refresh your offhand attack. So like really dual wielding means you get like a free offhand attack once around, like whereas if you're wielding a two-handed weapon, you're just going to get like 3 two-handed weapon attacks.
Right.
Um,
Right.
Where I
but oh, go ahead.
the only character I used dual wielding on was Asterion, and I had him take the thief subclass for the rogue, which gives you extra bonus actions. So
Okay.
he could use the offhand attack, and also being a rogue, he didn't get the multiple attacks like fighters got. He didn't get the really high number of main hand attacks. So he had multiple bonus actions, so he could do multiple offhand attacks if he wanted to, or he could do like one offhand attack and still use like a different bonus action like shoving or dashing. So the thief also gets things like dashing and disengage as bonus actions, not main actions. So he could do a lot of that kind of stuff. I found the offhand pretty useful for him specifically, but I can totally see for a fighter how maybe it wouldn't be quite as useful for all the reasons you said.
Yeah, one thing that did help offset it is, and this is very late in the game, but the what was her name? She was the avatar of Baal.
Oh,
Um,
Orin.
Orin. When you kill her, she has like a legendary offhand dagger that has like bonuses to parry and all this stuff. So it's
Oh, you
like
killed Orin? I'm kidding.
I was about to say, like, can you even not kill Orin?
I don't
Um,
know.
but uh, but yeah, so my fighter was a champion. I also equipped him with like some shadow step items, which was really cool because even though he didn't get that naturally, and I mean, as a champion, he could jump insane distances, but it was still nice to have a bonus action to be like, oh, like what's that up there? And then just like teleport over to like
Dude,
an archer and just start like
yeah.
unloading on him.
We put Shadow Step like on everybody had some way to do that. Like I don't because it was just so incredibly useful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so then I used Shadowheart. I left her as as her typical role, Deception. I think she's like a cleric of deception or whatever. I didn't change that, but I gave her gauntlets of or gloves of dexterity, so she was kind of like my budget thief because I didn't have like a rogue in my party. And a lot of her spells helped with stealth and stuff. So if I ever really needed to do that, like I would just use her. But her, she was pretty tanky. Like she had like a shield and the mace we talked about, and like I would have her use a spell called Spirit Guardians, which summon these little like they're kind of like energy balls that would circle her. And so as long as she was standing next to an enemy, they would kind of take passive damage every turn. And that was actually really effective in a lot of encounters. And then of course healing. I used Gale was my wizard. And I used Magic Missile. I don't remember what level 2 spell I would use. You were talking about Cloud of Daggers, which I ended up missing that one. But once you get to level 3 spells, I think you get Fireball, and that was just kind of like what it's like. That's kind of what the wizards do, right? They just use Fireball. Fireball and Wall of Fire, I think, in the higher levels is also quite good. And who was my Lizelle until Act 3 was my 4th party member, and she was a battle master. Just kind of classic 2-hand. So I had 2 fighters, Gale and Shadowheart.
Nice.
And then I think, and Lizelle actually, spoilers for Act 3, but Lizelle actually died in my playthrough, like permanently died.
She died in mine too.
So I think I switched to Minsk at that point and used him.
Nice, yeah.
Okay, so also
either
just
Minsk
to clarify,
or Karlach.
I don't
Either Minsk
know.
or Karlach.
I mean, just because I can't say what my cleric did doesn't mean he did nothing. I just don't. I just didn't notice what he did.
Yeah, my party. I use Shadowheart the entire game. And up until this point, I had also used Asterion the entire time. Having a thief was just very handy. He was also like, his DPS was surprisingly high. Like he dealt tons of damage. But then could also lockpick.
On that note, I did have Gale cast Knock a lot because I didn't have a thief.
So yeah.
I used the Knock spell.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, Asterion as a thief was so. I mean, any thief I'm sure would be, but like, because he had 20 dex, and then he gets all his perks from being a thief. Like, he was probably by the end of Act 2, he was getting like plus 14, plus 15 to any like sleight of hand check, maybe even more. So like, I would be running into like DC lockpick checks, and it's like, well, unless he critically fails, he gets it. He could roll a 2 and still get it. So it's like locks were just not an issue, which was pretty handy. And then my 4th slot, most of the game was Karlach. Every now and then I'd switch in Lizelle, usually for a story reason. Like when I went to the monastery, I would swap in Lizelle instead of Karlach. But that 4th slot was always one of those two as my, big front line. Karlach's a barbarian, so either a barbarian or a fighter for that 4th slot.
Did you specialize her as a or what was your specialty for Karlach?
For Karlach, I did the what was it called? It was the naturey one where you choose like animal aspects. I forget what that's officially called.
Okay, because I think I did wild magic, which was funny. It wasn't. I don't think I would recommend it, but it was kind of amusing.
Oh, there were all kinds of weird wild magic stuff because we had a wild magic person in there the whole time. So at the beginning, it was like just randomly summoning imps that we would also have to fight. And then at one point, it was like he started teleporting. Like he would cast on an enemy, and then he would like teleport where that enemy was, and the enemy would teleport where he was. And so that was weird because sometimes we get like flanked, by like an enemy that was in front of us. And then I think there were times where it would like he would turn people into like random animals, like chickens or something. I feel like there are all kinds of little weird, wild magic interactions that we ended up having.
Yeah, it was similar for Karlach because sometimes, I mean, there were only a couple that were bad, but like she would sometimes put like an aura that turned it into like difficult terrain. She would sometimes like teleport randomly, or like she would gain a teleportation skill, which was kind of handy, but I think it kept changing. And then, like you said, sometimes it could like summon an enemy or cause her to explode, and sometimes it was really awkward. Like if she turned into like if she summoned difficult terrain, like that was great if she was on top of an enemy, but like if she was like near my party, it was like, oh, come on, Karlach, like what's going on here? um, it's kind of like it was I think a lot smaller maybe for the barbarian rage or whatever, but it was still like just kind of weird, like all the little interactions that would pop out of nowhere.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's the wild. Wild magic sounds fun. Yeah, I forget what it was called, but it was whatever the subclass was that was like naturey, and you got to pick some animal aspects that gave you some bonuses. I picked the aspect of the elk, I think it was, that it gave Karlach and any allies near her like an extra 50% movement range, which I found incredibly useful. So like all my characters could just move farther. So I had a lot of good mobility around the arena. Astarion was a thief. Shadowheart I actually respec'd into the Tempest domain, I think. So offensively, I ended up using, it was like a level 3 lightning spell, chained lightning maybe. And she could like twice a day like max out the damage on it. Like it was like lightning or thunder spells. She could like max out the damage. And that chain lightning, you could like, as long as you kept concentrating, you could like recast it every turn without expending another spell slot. So I got a lot of good use out of that with her. And then my wizard, I actually picked divination, which would let you you got these dice that you could, I think the idea is like you have foresight, so you can like tweak rolls. So you get like these divination dice between rests that you could like replace any of you or your allies' rolls or enemy rolls as well. So if like one of your dice was a 3, if an enemy got a crit on you, you could be like, nope, I want to replace that with this 3 I have banked up. Or you could do vice versa for your allies. You could like give yourself a high roll when you miss, which is kind of interesting. Probably not as powerful as like a pure, offensive.
I think
subclass.
Tim's trying to do that in our actual D&D campaign. He's actually trying to play a divination mage.
Okay, cool.
I don't know. I'll let you know how
Okay.
that ends up.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I definitely think some of the other classes would have been just like straight up, or like other schools would have been straight up more powerful, like if you're just min-maxing. But I thought it was an interesting like way to play.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember seeing that because I picked for Gale. I think I picked evocation, but I remember looking at some of the other skills, and really, I mean, each tree seemed to have like a lot of useful skills. Like sometimes your damaging skills would be like they wouldn't be evocation, right? They'd be conjuration or illusion or and it seemed like they had with evocation, I think it was pretty cut and dry. It's like lower your enemy's elemental resistances, like or your chosen element does +1 base, has a +1 base to its roll or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Is that the one? There's one of the schools that makes your spells not damage your allies, so it makes you not do friendly fire. I forget which school that is.
Evocation does have that, yeah.
Okay, that
like
that to me, I remember looking at that and being like, well, that's probably the most useful because then you can just cast fireball even if your allies are in the area and they're fine. But
yep, You're not wrong.
Yeah, I remember looking at that and being like, that's probably the most useful one to pick, but I'm going to try something different. Yeah, so anything else? We're ready to talk about Act 3 stuff?
Yeah.
Sure. I guess the only other things I'll say for Act Two, real quick. So meeting Jahira was kind of cool because she was in the first two games. Although she kind of attacks you on sight, which led to a pretty quippy exchange. And let's see, we talked about Shadowheart. I felt like there was one other thing, but and Halson. There's a little side quest where you can like restore the forest. You find like this kid who's like connected to the forest. That was kind of a neat little side quest, I thought.
Yeah. Yeah, he was kind of like next to Shadowheart, kind of the main character I felt of Act 2. And then we move on to Act 3, which is where you get to Baldur's Gate, the city proper. And at least for me, story-wise, that's where a lot of the stuff kind of came together, especially the character stories. And I also feel like because of how open this game is, I feel like Act 3 could potentially... I feel like this is where the most variation can probably pop up. Because I feel like depending on what you've done in Act 1 and 2, some things could just be non-existent come Act 3. Or you could just go straight to Gortash and or Orin, and like you can probably fast track Act 3 pretty quickly if you wanted to. But for me, I think Act 3 was actually the longest act because I was trying to be pretty completionist, and there was a lot to do. But either of you want to kick us off with some Act 3 anecdotes, or I mean, I got things to share, but I want to see what you guys want to talk about.
I mean, I think from what I can recall, all we did was just I think we went to Gortash, and then he was like, "You need to go kill Orin," and I was like, "Okay." And so then I went to Orin, and Orin was like, "You need to kill Gortash." And
Yeah.
I was like, well, Gortash is kind of lame, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that. I'm gonna just do Orin's bidding. And the weird thing is, at that point in the game, we had just murdered so many groups of people because like all of our like charisma checks and everything had gone super bad. And then of course part of it was just chaotic people doing chaotic things, But so we went to the factory that was making those giant robot things because that seemed like they seemed like they would be tough, to deal with. Those giant, you know what I'm talking about, Ryan?
Yeah, there's
Uh,
like Gortash's Steel Watch, his
there it is.
automaton army. There's like a
Yeah,
factory where I think
right.
it's technically optional, but if you're gonna go after him, like they imply that and
Yeah.
of course they're like terrorizing the city and all that.
Right. So we went and took them out, and then we went back and killed him. That fight sucked because he had traps everywhere, and the traps did more damage than he did. And and then we went back, and this is when like we got back, and Orin was sitting there, and she had like Lizelle like just sitting there like on like a some sort of stone slab, and she was about to kill Lizelle, and she's like she's like, I'm about to kill Lizelle. How you feel about that? And I was like, I barely know who that is. so go for it, And so she ends up like murdering Lizelle. She like stabs her in the eyeballs, and then she was like, well, let's fight. And I was like, all right, And so I mean, I don't think that's just what she's into. I mean, she just likes fighting, So or murdering. I guess that's what she's into, is murdering, So yeah, she comes at us, and then we We took her out. That particular fight, I don't remember a lot about, but I do remember there was this fight before that that also was kind of wild, where there's this dude who's standing up on like a precipice or something, and there are these red gates that kind of mark the barriers of the spell, and he sits there just kind of stewing and creating this spell. And if he actually finishes it, then it just wipes everybody who's in those zones. I don't know if you guys remember that.
This
Yeah,
one,
it's
I can't remember the name of it.
go ahead.
But
Yeah, it's when you're going, I think, into the Temple of Baal. There are
yeah,
like these shadows, and like you said, there are a bunch of archers like up on cliffs, and there's like a caster doing this ritual way in the back. And I think actually when you get to him, he backs off farther and continues the ritual. And I was like, "You jerk!" Because
yeah,
I had like
yeah.
used up all my shadow steps and stuff.
Yeah, he
Um,
was tricky. I think the first time we fought him, we like wiped, and I was like, ugh. And then we went back and saw him again, and I almost got to him. I was probably within like 5 feet of him, and if I could have gotten to him, if he could have been moved, I can't remember if he could have been moved or not, but if he would have been moved, I would have easily knocked him into the abyss. But I couldn't get to him in time, and he ended up killing me. But you could actually kind of game that fight a little bit by like some of your party members could just step outside of the gates when he finished the spell, and so then you didn't get offed by it.
mm,
Um,
right.
but uh, but yeah, so that's and then so we did that and took out Orin, and then kind of had our final little showdown where we worked our way all the way up, and then we had to crawl up the brain stem to get on top of the mother brain, and that's where we fought that red dragon that I mentioned earlier. And apparently at that part of the game, apparently there are like tons of allies that can come help you if you've helped everybody. We
uh-huh,
had like two groups of people, that was it.
uh-huh.
And after the first encounter that you can call them in, we only had like one guy from one of the, because it seems like if whoever survives the first battle where you can possibly call them in, you can call them into the second battle, and they'll kind of enter the second battle kind of wherever they were during the first. So if they were really hurt, they'll come in really hurt again. But yeah, we only had two groups of people, and one group got totally obliterated. And the other thing that was annoying is I thought we had done, the entirety of the Owlbear quest line. And there must have been something that we missed because, we had talked to him, and even at the end of the game, he's like gigantic. Like there's the epilogue where you see him, and he's like grown up and everything. But we never had access to calling the owlbear during our final battle. And apparently, he's super cool in that final battle, according to people who have people who have seen it. But yeah, so that was kind of so yeah. Our Act 4 was all it was just you know going to Gortash, going to Orin, going to the factory, killing Gortash, killing Orin, and then going up the brain.
That's
And
so
that was
interesting. Yeah,
yeah, that's pretty much what we did.
it's like so different from my Act 3.
Yeah,
And yeah, the Gortash fight with all the traps, with that very accurate. That was an annoying fight.
yeah, and you could actually take out the traps before you started, and Tim kind of hinted at that because he had already played this part, and but he didn't tell. So I tried to take out some of them, but then you kind of like there's some that are higher up the wall too, so you actually have to really look to see all the ones that are in there. So
Hmm.
tricky.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, Ryan, did you do a lot of other stuff in Act 3?
I'm trying to remember. I mean, I think in terms of the main quest, I feel like it's actually probably somewhat similar because I do remember, you talk to Gortash as soon as you walk in, um,
Hmm.
and then like Orin, uh, like you run into her earlier. I actually ran into her along the coastline. She was like posing as like a dead guy or whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
As she does.
Yeah.
And it's funny because she captured Lizelle in my game as well. But I mentioned that Lizelle was one of my main party members. So it was actually during one of the times where, I talked about how much of a pain in the neck Lizelle was and how like I'd kind of put up with her through all this stuff. And then like I was testing out like Karlach and I think at some point Minsk as well. I was trying to rotate and play with a few different party members. And while I was out on one of those excursions, she captured Lizelle, and I was like, "Oh, you jerk!" um, but I do remember I did the quest with finding Minsk.
Hmm.
I did some other side quests. I remember there's one you mentioned going to the factory, and there's one where you have to go to this like underwater.
Yeah,
I don't know if it was the Iron Throne.
Iron Throne. Yeah, I was gonna bring that up because that was one of the most intense like encounters for me the entire game.
Yeah, super cool. I think I got maybe all but one or two of the prisoners out.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, that was a pretty cool, and I felt like that was kind of in the Gortash because I
Yes.
don't remember if it was after I agreed to kill Orem or after I had done something else, but the Steel Watch did start like attacking me on the streets.
Yeah.
Ooh, I
And
bet that was rough.
those guys, yeah, they were pretty tough.
Hmm.
Um, Plus, when they aggro you, like the town guard will aggro you, so you'll basically have like half of Baldur's Gate just like turn on you. Um, so yeah, I definitely went in and
Yeah.
blew up the Steel Watch factory.
Yeah. Once you do the Iron Throne, which for Will's reference, it's like a Gortash's prison, and you go there, and when you go there, Gortash immediately is onto you, and any deal you've made with him is immediately broken, and he's like after you from there on out, which is why the Steel Watch turns, as Ryan mentioned. But he also like sets the place to blow up, and he's got like a bunch of prisoners in there. You're trying to get out, and you have like I don't know if you
There's a
remember
bunch of
Ryan.
prisoners in the forge too. They're these like little gnomes who have these collars that are explosive or
Mhm.
whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are their families basically.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, okay. I
Yeah.
see.
That's how he keeps the gnomes in the forge working. Is he's imprisoned a lot of their family, so if they disobey, he'll like kill them or whatever.
Got it.
Um, but yeah, it ends. He like sets a timer for the iron forge to detonate or self destruct or whatever. I forget the exact mechanic like details of that, but you only have like 6 turns or something crazy to like get in there, get people, and get out. So like it ends up being this really intense like set piece of like trying to extract all of these people.
Yeah, and these like Sahagin or whatever start like popping in and
Mhm.
attacking you, and like
Yeah.
nets at the prisoners.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. They do some pretty devious stuff. And you kind of have to split your forces up if you want to get everyone in time. And there's some pretty
Yeah,
important prisoners in there as well. Like Will's dad, Duke Ravengard, is down there. I forget who all exactly is down there, but there are like at least 2 or 3 like pretty important people. Like I remember having multiple quest lines pointing there.
yeah, it's interesting because I opened the gate for him, but then is it Menorah the demon's name?
Yes, I think so.
She or whatever her name is, the
Hmm.
demon that she popped up and she basically like just like told him to not move and like so he died. Like he wouldn't leave.
Oh no.
Um, that does remind me. Did you find? I don't remember if this is Act Two or Three. Did you find Menorah in the
Yeah.
pod?
Yes, that was at the end of Act Two, I think. But yeah,
Okay,
I
that
did
was
set her. I did set her free. I like tried to make some agreement with her to like release Will or whatever, even though I knew she probably wouldn't honor it because they never do. Um, but I did set her free, and I ended up breaking the Will's pact with her, which in theory doomed his dad, but then I was still able to free him from the Iron Throne. So it seemed like I kind of got the best of both worlds in a way.
Yeah, that little section was funny though, because yeah, I don't think I put the screws on her or anything, but you get some funny dialogue options
Yeah,
where you can totally just make fun of her.
it is.
It's like,
Yeah,
oh,
I love it when this game does stuff like that, because it does, of like kind of flipping the power dynamics on its head, because normally you think of those like devil characters as being like too powerful to touch, but then yeah, you just find her like imprisoned and she can't get out unless you help her. um which yeah, does lead to some good dialogue, like you said.
yeah. Um, Circling back to Baldur's Gate, I do remember also doing the Night Song side quest. Um, that one was pretty interesting, where you go
Mm-hmm.
confront Laura Kane.
Yes, and she
Um,
totally pulls a Bane and just lifts him up and snaps his back.
yeah, yeah. That it's like this isn't going to end well for
Yeah,
someone.
yep. No, that was a cool fight. I like that fight a lot.
Yeah. Um, he has like these elemental myrmidons that have like counterattack mechanics of some kind.
Hmm.
Um, what else for Act Three? I guess the other big thing was that I can think of. Yeah, so I did Gortash. I set Minsk free, which he's still hilarious. That was still pretty funny. And watching Jahira like get mad at him, um, which that's also kind of a thing.
Yeah,
Um, but oh, Shadowheart has a follow up,
yeah.
and the character that you meet, the matron, I think she was in Laconia. She was one of your playable characters from Baldur's Gate 2.
Okay.
Um, she was like you could recruit her as like a cleric. Um, that was kind of a pretty challenging section. Um, but yeah, then I went and confronted Orym. I think after Gortash, and she had Lizelle on the sacrificial altar or whatever, and there was a pretty high difficulty check, like intimidate. She was it was kind of like, hey, I kept up my part of the bargain, went and killed Gortash or whatever. But oh, she was mad because you fight Sarevok. That was really cool. Um,
Yeah, that fight
'Cause
was tough
he,
too.
yeah, he was the villain from I think the first Baldur's Gate, and so when you walk in and
Yeah.
it's like you're like an assassin, and it's funny. I think I had Minsk and Jahira with me at the time, and he was like, "What are you doing?" It's like, and the dialogue between them is so funny because, like, they're both like, and of course, as the player character, you can say, "Hey, I'm going to offer them as sacrifices or whatever," but of course, that wasn't the plan. So, uh, it's like, it's like, "Hey, Jahira, do you want to go kill these guys or kill him again?" And she's like, "No, once is enough." He's like, "I'll let you handle it." They
Hmm.
just, like they kind of run their mouth like at each other. Um, but yeah, that was a really cool fight. It was kind of really cool that they referenced that character, and then like if you have like Minsk and Jahira in your party, like they'll refer to like having killed him in the first game.
Hmm. Yeah, that was a cool confrontation. I like that a lot. I uh, that's what I just like. Some of the ones you've mentioned, I even forgot, like the night song thing. But like Act Three just has like so many huge like encounters, like pivotal feeling encounters of like major characters that have you've built up to these moments. And then they just kind of come one after another. It's wild.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess yeah. Then I lost Lizelle because that was one of those things where it was a really high difficulty check roll, and I did it. I think I used up all my inspiration, and I was like, well, I'm just gonna roll with this. Like,
Yeah.
um,
That's so funny that so Orin captured Lizelle for me as well. And I like my understanding is you it could be different characters. Like it's somewhat randomized, and it's funny that for all three of us, she took Lizelle.
Yeah, it was funny for me too because it was like one of the kind of uncommon times that I wasn't using her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did end up getting Lizelle back. I don't remember how that played out, but I did end up using her later, so I was happy to have her back.
Yeah, yeah, it felt like it was doable, but it was like I was gonna have to do a bunch of reloading to try and get that difficult. And I was like, you know,
Mm-hmm. And I feel like they did really good character work with both Orin and Gortash as well, like those two villains. I feel like if I have any complaint about earlier in the game is like maybe they didn't fully develop some of the villains. Like I think they did a good job with like Auntie Ethel, who actually you can fight her again in Act 3.
really,
Yeah, there is a continuing arc with her. The woman she captured, I forget her name, but that woman she captured in Act 1 had captured in Act 1, you can find her again in Act 3, and there have been like reports of like a hag doing stuff to people, and you can like hunt Ethel down again, and apparently she's come back in some way, and you can fight her again.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
The first time I fought Ethel, we kicked her ass, and then she gave me some of her hair, and I used it to get a permanent boost of strength.
Yeah. Yeah, you did.
I think I just outright killed her in the first encounter.
Well, I think if you don't, then she gives you that
Yeah,
little boost.
that's
Yeah.
right. So I did what you did, Will, is
Yeah.
I took her hair, so I guess I didn't actually kill her in that encounter. So that's why she came back. So maybe, Ryan, if you killed her, then she's not in Act 3. That's a guess.
Yeah.
That's possible, yeah.
That would
'Cause,
track. I mean, if you're dead, you
there
can't
were-
be alive. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
there were no compromises. Like she just died, but it was neat because she kept using an invisibility spell in that encounter. But I was testing out this like there's a wizard spell where you tether like a lightning line to someone, and I just happened to be trying that out. But she would go invisible, and like the tether would still be there, so I could use it to like shock her out of the invisibility.
Oh,
That
nice.
was it was still a tough fight, but it was funny that I was able to like kind of get around
Mhm.
that annoying behavior.
Yeah, that's super handy. Did either of you get a special eye from a certain member of your camp that would allow you to see invisibility?
Yeah, I didn't get that, but one of our party members did.
I
Yeah.
didn't go all the way through with that because dude man pulled out a needle and I was like, yeah, no.
I was like, you know what, man? I'm gonna trust you. You do your thing. You definitely do not seem like you know what you're doing, and this is probably gonna go bad. But I'm gonna ride this through. And yeah, I got that eyeball, and that was very helpful against Auntie Ethel.
Special
great.
eyeballs.
Hmm. Yeah. So with Act 3, there's a lot of stuff we could dig into, but I think the two things we haven't touched on, which also side comment, Ryan, you mentioned the resolution to Shadowheart's story. That fight where you fight, what was her name again? You mentioned her, started the V.
Viconia,
Yeah,
Devere, I think was the
that
name.
fight where you fight her and all of her people was one of the hardest fights of the game for me. Like there are just so many people. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and they trying to remember because I think some of them have some pretty nasty abilities. Like they have fear abilities and
Mhm.
like yeah, there's just
Yeah,
a ton of them. And then Viconia, I think she gets some like high level cleric spells or something.
yeah, that fight was real rough.
They kept like casting magical darkness everywhere, which like
Yeah.
apparently wizards can't draw line of sight to even like
Mhm.
drop a fireball in.
Yep. This
I
is
was
true.
like, oh no, Gale's like not able to throw fireballs. What can I do? They've defeated my wizard.
Yeah. Yeah, it was rough. Um, I had
I
to,
don't
yeah.
think I did that fight. I don't think. Where would this fight have been?
Forget where in the
It's
city it was.
there's a Temple of Shar. I think it's hidden in. I
Oh
don't think
yeah,
it's like there's not a sign that says Temple of Shar. I think it's like they have it kind of implied that it's uh
yeah. It's
like
called like the House of Grief or something like that.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
yeah, that sounds right.
but you get led there as part of Shadowheart's quest, and I don't know if you can get like I don't know what that looks like if you haven't been doing stuff with Shadowheart.
Got it.
Um, I mean, it could still be possible to do. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
But yeah, the other two parts. So neither of you did Asterian's story because Ryan, you said he died, right? Or you didn't recruit him.
He
Um,
I told him to take a hike.
yeah. Asterian I found pretty annoying for most of the game. Um, but I kind of warmed up to him as time went on, and the resolution to his story was actually pretty impactful. His old master Cazador, you end up tracking him down and like having a big fight with him. Which I mean, I'm not going to go into details. It's kind of a lengthy process, like a multi-step quest, how all that comes about. But you end up learning a lot about Asterian's backstory and the fight with Cazador and like the choice to, because Cazador is like making all these people vampires, Asterian's a vampire, and like the choice to like, do you free these vampires who are gonna like potentially go feed on a bunch of people, or do you murder them all who are vampires not of their own choice? Like there ends up being like a lot of tricky like moral conundrums, I guess, in that quest line that I thought was really well done. And just Asterian's growth as a character as well, because like he actually wants to take the power that Cazador has, and you can kind of talk him back from that and like steer him back towards a little bit more of a good path. Um, and also when you do finally kill Cazador, like Asterian just goes full on like just loses his shit and is just like stabbing Cazador in the chest repeatedly and then breaks down crying and is just really impactful scene. Like it's pretty gnarly. Because I thought they did a really good job wrapping up Asterian's arc. Um, he was one of the characters who I turned around on the most, like as his arc went. Um, and then, did either of you go to the House of Hope?
Was that
That doesn't sound
sounds
familiar.
familiar?
Okay, this
Well,
is yeah, this is in Act 3. This is the House of Hope. Is you go to hell. You go to Raphael's. This is his house.
oh no, we didn't do that because I heard about that. There, you do the singing fight or whatever.
Mhm.
Uh,
This was
yeah,
probably my favorite. This is probably my favorite thing in the entire game.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, because you've been interacting with Raphael the entire game, and
Who
he's
is
been
that?
trying to. I'm sorry,
Who's Raphael? What do you do?
he's the devil guy. Um,
Devil guy.
I'll find a picture to send him. You definitely encountered him. He pops up
Okay,
multiple times throughout the game.
okay.
Um,
It's funny because I I saw him, and he's a big part of Lazelle's quest, right? He has that
yes, he has the
because
Orphic hammer.
the artifact turns out to be like basically they've imprisoned this Githyanki hero or prince who
Yeah,
has
Prince
this
Orpheus.
resistance to illithid powers, and so like a big part of the story, and of course Lazelle, like he's like, this is like the savior of my people, like we should get him out. So you're stuck between like whether you side with the emperor or whether you side with Lazelle. And then I think if you want to free Orpheus, you either have to parlay with Raphael or I guess break into the
Hmm.
House of Hope or whatever. So yeah, I met him in the brothel or whatever, and he's like, I want to make you a deal. And I was like, no. That's like I don't want to talk to you. Uh,
I
Yeah.
do remember seeing him once, at least, but um,
so that's
Yeah.
kind of basically how that exchange ended.
Yeah, that's interesting that you didn't see because he pops up in every act. I remember him first popping up in Act 1, and he was around the all of the Shar trials stuff in Act 2. He was somewhere around there.
Okay.
But yeah, in Act 3, he's in the brothel, like you mentioned, Ryan, and he's still trying to cut a deal with you. He's like he wants in on all of this. He wants the artifact and like access to these powers and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, I ended up, which I guess we'll get to the endings after this. I ended up freeing Orpheus and not siding with the Emperor, which means I did need the Orphic Hammer. But I made no deals with Raphael, so I broke into the House of Hope, which was a whole process to get in there, and like stole the hammer. And the House of Hope itself is just really weird. Like there's stuff going on in there, and we're getting short on time, so I won't get into details. But I thought it was a really cool area, and like sneaking through there and trying to get stuff. And then yeah, you get the hammer, and then you start working your way out of there. And the second you pick up the hammer, Raphael, I guess, just knows. So like he immediately like zips back because he's not in the area. He's off doing whatever he's doing. And as you leave, you have to fight him and his sidekick guy. I forget what his name is, but he's like this really big.
I've
big
heard that's a
guy.
really, really hard fight. Was that rough for you?
Your gear is his little buddy, or big buddy. It was a pretty tough fight. So what I ended up doing is I ended up using the spell Dominate Monster or something like that, or Hold Monster.
Okay.
I think Hold
Yeah.
Monster. So I basically kept Raphael, like kept Hold Monster on him. Either Shadowheart or me knew the spell. I think Shadowheart knew it, maybe. One of us knew it, and then the other one of us had multiple scrolls for that spell, so one of us could keep it on at all times. And I guess I got pretty lucky with some of my rolls or their saves against it. Because if I hadn't like had that Hold Monster, that would have been a really tough fight. I mean, it was still pretty hard, even as it was. Like I had to deal with because there was a bunch of minions in there, including this Your Gear guy who was hit like a truck. He was really strong. But then once I kind of cleaned up enough other stuff, then I could kind of take on Raphael by himself. And at that point, he by himself wasn't so bad. But with everything else, it would have been really rough. But yeah, as well alluded to, when you start the fight, there's a unique boss fight song that only plays during his fight, and it's literally him singing his own boss fight song, and it is incredible. That
is hilarious.
It is so good. So yeah, that fight itself was really great just from a presentation standpoint, but the whole House of Hope was also really good. I mean, there's a character in there literally named Hope. And she actually has her own arc that I thought was pretty good as well.
That's pretty funny. Yeah, I missed a lot of that because I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna work with you, Raphael. Like, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so then I guess turning to the ending, so I guess you didn't free Orpheus then. I guess neither of you did?
No.
Right, yeah, no, didn't.
So you sided
didn't
with the
free.
Emperor?
Yeah.
I did, yeah. Which is funny because I was like, I don't know how I'm going to reconcile this with Lizelle, but then I guess Orin kind of solved that problem for me.
This is true. Assist to Orin.
I mean, just saying. Not that I would stab any of you guys in the back, but
right, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I'll run through my ending, and if you guys want to share your ending as well. Yeah, I did end up not joining, which I didn't really dislike the Emperor. It was more of like I had to choose, and it kind of felt like Orpheus felt like the way I wanted to go. So yeah, I got the Orphic Hammer, freed Orpheus, but then because the Emperor left, someone needed to, I forget the exact reasoning, but someone needed to become a a mind flayer
Right.
to accomplish what we were accomplishing. So I bit that bullet and I became a mind flayer,
Mhm.
which gives you all sorts of fun abilities.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Did someone in your group become a mind flayer, Will?
Yeah. Yeah. Our mage did.
Nice.
Yeah.
Did anyone in your group become a mind flayer, Ryan?
I actually resisted it. Because I didn't, um, I kind of sided with the emperor. I was never forced to, and every time he brought it up, I was like, "No, I'm good."
Mm-hmm.
I'm
And
not
he
interested.
he didn't like it, but he never really forced it. And you know, again, since I didn't have to, so yeah, I was able to get by without me or anybody in my party having to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you deny such a great gift, though? You know what I mean? It's just.
I
That's what
actually.
they keep telling me, but
So did you guys consume there are like
Tadpoles?
the tadpoles you could collect along the way when you killed
Oh
like
yeah.
absolute people?
Yeah,
Okay.
we did a couple of them.
I
At the
didn't
same
actually.
time, like at least for the fighter, I didn't actually find those abilities all that exciting, to be
Mm-hmm.
honest. I just didn't, and so I think I might have taken like a couple of them, but I think like I didn't really take all that many, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that's just me.
Yeah, and you didn't use any of them, Ryan?
No, I don't know if I did a single one because it's one of those things where it's like it's a little hard to know exactly what the game is communicating, but at the same time, it felt like a corrupting type thing. Like, sometimes it's like, like a turn to the dark side thing. You
Mm-hmm.
use too much of this, uh, you kind of like the power corrupts you or whatever.
Too
So
much
I
Yeah.
don't know if that was
juice.
actually part of the story or not, but it seemed implied.
Yeah, that was also my read on it, but I mean, it sounds like Will, that's not really how it pans out. Is that correct?
I mean, I think at one point every time you use one, I think it seems to kind of like put you closer to it. And then I think at some point there's like a second tier that you can get and you might have gotten that anyway.
I
But yeah,
think when
in
I turned into
talks.
Mind Flayer, it just gave me everything.
Right. I'm talking about like before that.
Mm.
There's another part where he asks you, he's like, "Hey, you guys ready to take the next step?" And then you become like a little bit blue and more veiny. I don't know if you
Mm.
remember that. But that seems to be kind of like you're kind of on the road a little bit, you
Hmm.
know. So I don't know if you didn't get that offered, if maybe that's because you hadn't been eating them, or I don't know.
Hmm.
Um, you remember getting? Do you remember like, after you mean initially, of course, you're infected,
Yeah.
and you can start eating those things and getting some abilities, but then there's like a second tier of transformation where you're like getting closer to becoming a mind flayer without becoming one completely. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I do feel like the Emperor tried to like offer me like a more substantial
right,
transformation and was
yeah,
like trying to push that on me like somewhere halfway-ish through the game or something. I don't know.
yep,
Um,
yep. That's
but
about
I
right.
never consumed any of the little ones. I kind of had the same read as Ryan that
Oh,
it was kind of like a character choice like corrupting type thing, which it might not have been. That was just the read I had.
yeah. I mean, I don't know. I just wanted some more power. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think you can actually have the NPCs take it too, because I think Asterion wanted to do it. He like because he's part of his character is he was just power hungry. Um,
Yeah. Well, the funny thing about him, right, is it actually it seemed like being a mind flayer or being infected by the parasite like nullified his
yeah,
inability to go outside or some shit. So
yeah.
yeah.
So during the ending scene, like after the final boss, when your parasites are removed, you're like standing outside, like having
Yeah.
a wrap up conversation, and his skin just starts burning, and he's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I guess this is gone," and he like runs back inside.
Yeah, that happened in my ending as well.
Okay, cool. Um, yeah, but despite not taking any of the Mind Flayer stuff until the end, like it kind of felt like the right, like I guess my role playing in my head, it felt like the right thing to do to like for me to be the quote unquote sacrificial Mind Flayer person.
They ask you what you want to do after that too, I think, right? It's like, do you want to like go into exile or, you know?
Yeah, so yeah, so I guess yeah, for my ending, yeah, so I didn't actually romance anyone, but Karlach was kind of like, I guess in my roleplay headcanon was like my best friend or whatever. And with her heart situation, I don't even know how much of this you're familiar with, Will, since you didn't travel with the
Tim
party
told me a
members.
little bit about it. It's apparently like she just wants to touch somebody because she's all jacked up.
Yeah, I mean, she like in place of her actual heart, she has like some kind of engine, like infernal engine that makes
Right.
her too hot to touch.
That's
But it
yeah.
also means she's going to explode at some point. And
Right.
like, I think my read on it is like the tadpole was also keeping that in check a little bit. So like during that
Right.
ending scene, she like starts heating up, and like she's been told throughout the whole game that she's like basically just going to explode and die at some point, and there's nothing that can be done about it. Um, but if she is in Avernus, the first layer of hell, she won't explode because she's surrounded by all that heat, I guess. And that was part of I forget the who she had a pact with, but I think that was part of their way of like trying to keep her in Avernus. Anyway,
Right.
It
I
sounded like it wasn't a pact so much as like she was sold into slavery.
yes,
It's like the demon that Mizora works for as well.
yes.
Like somebody fairly high level in Avernus.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And then
So
apparently like you guys go fight shit at the end or something like that. She seems like she's ready to go.
yeah, so well, I mean, she was ready to just like um she was ready to just I mean, she didn't want to die,
Mm-hmm.
and like a lot of her arc was trying to find a way to live,
Yeah.
but you couldn't find one, at least not that I found.
Well, the
Um
game's all about that, not being able to find things, you know? I mean,
mhm.
trying to get rid of that parasite for the longest time. Can't do that.
Yeah. So yeah, at the end of the game, like she was like I don't know, like she was about to die, and like you can basically I don't know if you can only do this if you're good friends with her or whatever, but like you could basically make the suggestion of like, well, you know, you could go to Avernus, and like she doesn't really want to do that. Like she pushes back against that. But I was like, in my head canon, I was like, well, I'm a mind flayer. I probably don't have a place in the real world. So I was basically like, yeah, I'll go there with you, and we'll just hang out and kill and kill stuff. Um, so yeah, the final fate of my character was I just went to Avernus and hung out with Karlach, and I was a mind flayer. And presumably we do that until
Kind of
the end of
like,
time.
I mean, that's kind of like what your real life is, though. You know what I mean? Just,
Yeah, you know, it just
Hanging out
I
with
thought it
mind
was like
flayers.
yeah,
mm,
I thought it was like a weirdly fitting ending. Like I could see some people maybe making the argument that that's like not like I don't know a real conclusive ending, but I feel like in the context of like D&D type stories, and also in the arcs of these characters, both my character and Karlach, it kind of made sense. Like I don't know,
yeah.
they kind of self-exiled themselves, and we're gonna just keep fighting shit.
There you go. Fuck it up.
Yeah, so how did what do you guys want to say about how your game's wrapped up?
Well, let's see. I think at the very end, you know, Garrett became a mind flayer. We went in there and took out the final. You know, it's like you're on top of the brain, then you go through portal, and then you're like in the real interior of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
Then we killed that, and I think at the end, essentially, we had to kind of decide what to do with like Garrett, and I think it was sort of like we were like, "Hey, man, you can hang out, but if you get frosty, we're going to check you, or something like that." Because apparently, like as soon as you turn, the game is like, you feel this like insane craving for brains or whatever, and so you better, take care of that. Can't have you around here eating brains,
Mm-hmm. Oh
But
yeah, so I did do the epilogue where Withers like summons everyone back, and you're like,
yeah,
it's like
that was in ours too.
6 months later, and it's like, oh, what's everyone doing over these 6 months? And me and Karlach are just like, yeah, we're just hanging out, killing demons. Like, it's cool.
That's how we roll.
But I talked to, I forget who it was. It might have been Lae'zel. I don't remember. But I was talking to it was Jaheira. So I was like everyone's in your camp. And I was just like walking around, like talking to everybody, like catching up with them. And I talked to Jaheira, and it made me save these checks because I started having the impulse to eat brains.
That's so good. I like
and
it.
I think if I'd failed the check, I would have just eaten Jaheira's brains.
That's good.
That's really funny. That's like a thing that can happen.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, Will. Were you?
No. I mean, yeah. I don't think so. I mean, it seemed. I mean, I like the way it ended.
Cool. Yeah. How'd
I
your
mean, I
game up?
definitely. I think I mentioned this to you guys earlier, or I mentioned someone earlier, but it's like this game, even though it was as long as Divinity Original Sin 2, it didn't feel as long.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the pacing of the story was much better.
Yeah. And yeah, I agree with you. I've heard some people are like unhappy with the endings, and I could totally understand that, especially because there's probably a lot of different ways things can end. But I was pretty happy with like especially the character arcs, like how Shadowheart's story ended, how Asterian's story ended, like how me and Karlach's story ended. Like I thought a lot of them were well done.
Yeah. I mean, at the very end, we barely had anybody in our camp, so it wasn't a ton to wrap up. It was mostly just kind of like, well, how do we feel about this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in my game, I think I heard recently, like just a month or so ago, that Larian actually put out a patch that adds a bunch of ending content. And yeah, in my game, like I said, I ended up not being corrupted, but I think really there was just like kind of a quick conversation between all of the characters after they got out, and then I watched Karlach blow up. Because I guess that was how her story ended in my game. Like she got through the final battle and she's like, I'm not going to Avernus, and so she just like exploded. And then yeah, that's basically all I remember. Like there wasn't a whole lot to it when I finished it.
The only reason that's funny, Ron, is because like everybody I've played, the people I've talked to the most about this game have been, a little bit foul at him, and they were, but like everybody was so tender about Karlach. Everyone's like, Karlach is so special, and what we had was so special. And you're like, Karlach just blew up. I don't know, she just blew up.
I mean, I liked Karlach's character. She was like this goofy soldier type, and like you said, like when there's one part where you install a plate that kind of allows her to like survive longer. You get infernal iron, and you help. There's a blacksmith who can install it to kind of help her, and like I gave her like a pat on the shoulder or something like that, and that was something she seemed to appreciate. Like that kind of physical contact or whatever.
You gave her a pat on the shoulder, and then you're like, "Ow, that's hot."
But yeah, like I mean, I I didn't really volunteer to like go to like Avernus with her. I just wasn't planning on doing that. And, I was like, you can go back, and she's like, nope, not doing it. I'm like, all right, yes. But yeah, like literally, I think so you defeat the brain, like my characters are joking about like hanging out in Baldur's Gate. And then there's like a little follow on sequence where she's like, I think there was like will you be there with me? She's like, I guess I'm going to face death. Will you be there with me? And like, she literally just like burns into a pile of ash. It's tragic. But those two sequences were kind of the only things I remember about my ending. It was very short. Like, I don't remember there being a whole lot to it. It didn't really, I was a little surprised at like how little it, and the game itself was pretty satisfying, and a lot of stories kind of, the arcs are resolved anyway, but I do think the ending content was just a touch disappointing.
Yeah, and
Or
I did get there. There was, I mean, this wasn't a lot, but there was also conversations around Lae'zel at the end, which you couldn't would have gotten because she also died.
Right.
But I think she was going off to like take on Vlaakith. I think like she rode off with that other guy. Like
Is it
some other
Orpheus
Githyanki.
or the
Yeah,
prince?
Orpheus, and there's some other guy who was like helping you to free Orpheus
He
for a
was
while.
that legendary guy, right? Who was
Yeah.
trying to really push you into it.
Yeah. So there was point being there was some wrap up with Lae'zel at the end as well.
Yeah, she got wrapped up in my game.
Well, we've been going long here. It's probably about time we wrap this thing up.
Yeah.
Will, what are your final thoughts, Will?
Well, I think you've read kind of my game of the year list. This is probably in my top 5 for the year. I thought the combat was fantastic. I definitely liked how kind of emergent it was. I mean, not only you got to see a lot of different monsters from the D&D kind of compendium, the D&D universe, and a lot of them kind of came at you with sort of unique mechanics, and then you kind of had to figure out how you're going to tackle that. And I think the other aspect of it that's kind of fun, that I think everybody who's probably played this game had the experience of like digging through their inventory to try and see if they had a scroll that would help them in whatever the situation was. I mean,
Yeah.
I definitely was doing that. Or like for me, of course, because I was a fighter, it was like arrows. Because I was always like, well, okay, do I have an arrow that can like help me with this particular situation? Because this situation doesn't seem good or whatever. And so I think I remember mentioning this to Fowler before, but one of the things that was interesting was I remember we were in a fight, and I think every other member of our party was gone. And at that point, I didn't have a ranged weapon. This was relatively early in the game, and I like ran. We were sitting there, and everybody was feeling kind of hopeless, and we were like, "Man, what are we gonna do? Do we got to start this all over? I don't want to start this encounter over." And so, but I remembered, I was like, well, hey, wasn't there a goblin over there that had a bow? And they were like, I think so. And so then I like ran over there and grabbed the bow and then finished the encounter with this random bow that I found, like, and that was like, that sort of stuff seemed to kind of happen a lot. There's a lot of verticality and using verticality in different ways. I remember I was walking on top of these steam pipes at one point when I was fighting. I think I was the only one who survived an encounter with when I was in the factory where we shut down the bots, or the Steel Watch or whatever. And I remember the Steel Watch somehow like they couldn't get up on the pipes that I was walking on the ceiling. And so I could like sit there and take shots at them for a while. And so that was a way to kind of circumvent how nasty they were in melee. But there are all kinds of little ways that people solve different encounters. And so it's interesting. One of the interesting things to talk to people about this game is like, how did you solve this encounter, or what did you end up doing? And I think we even kind of went into that a little bit, in a little bit now, talking about how certain people handled certain encounters, and Fowler was talking about the scrolls of hold person and the casting of the hold person, and I was talking about, of course, I can't imagine playing Baldur's Gate 3 without jamming down at least 2 Cloud of Daggers, and and Ryan was like, Ryan's like, oh, Cloud of Daggers, what is that? And so everybody kind of approaches these encounters differently. So anyway, that's sort of I think the takeaway I'm gonna have, because like I said, a lot of the story stuff and the companion stuff is really, I didn't get a lot of that because I was, playing multiplayer. So,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, and who knows, maybe I'll get to see some of that stuff later, but yeah.
Yeah, just one quick anecdote. Like you were talking about fighting the red dragon on the brain. I like to accentuate your point of like there's so many different like ways to play. Like I basically hasted and flew and teleported my way past the dragon and then cast a globe of invulnerability around my party as I did what I needed to do that the dragon couldn't beat through.
Nice.
It's just like, I ain't fighting you.
Yeah, he hit. That probably was, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What are your parting thoughts here, Ryan?
Yeah, I think that is one good point that Will raises that we touched on off and on, but it's this, I guess, Larian is known for their systems, and especially in the first part of the game where everything is really hard, it's like I'll throw this vial of oil and maybe I'll find a way to set it on fire, like just
yeah.
just like looking for little angles and like potions, and also trying things like trying the weird spells like the scroll of speak with dead or like potion of animal chatting, and how much content they've kind of put in. I would say overall kind of my impressions, I talked about playing some of those old school CRPGs, and it, to me, like Baldur's Gate 3 feels like, in some ways it kind of captures some of that sense of what those games were doing. And obviously it's very modernized, like you've got full voice acting and you've got the first person cinematics, and the interactions are a lot more complex, and there's all this multiplayer stuff they've added in, so it's obviously a much more developed game, but it still like reminds me of things that I liked about the those games. And I mentioned a few things that were kind of also annoying about those games, like having to be a completionist about some things, or like the way that event triggers line up weirdly. I had some the occasional technical issue in my playthrough, but overall it's pretty cool how they kind of managed to sort of I guess continue that legacy, or like run with that legacy of the series.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing you mentioned is like voice acting and stuff, and I think like the writing and the voice acting and all of that was really well done. And I think those are some kind of nice. I mean, the older games I'm sure had good writing as well, but like I think there are some of like the production value stuff with the voice acting and the cinematics that does make it feel more modern in some ways, and I thought they did it well. But yeah, my final thoughts are pretty similar with what you guys have said. I think this is a really well implemented like implementation of D&D in like a video game form, and we've talked so much about like the freedom of way to approach things, and like that to me is absolutely one of the big things of this game, and I think it's just really fun and really impressive how they did all that stuff. As we've been talking this whole podcast, I'm like, man, if this game wasn't so long, I would really like to play it again and like try different things and see different stuff, because it just feels like there's so many possibilities in this game. And I think that's one of the really magical things about it. There's definitely some nitpicks, as Ryan alluded to. Like I ran into some bugs as well. It is kind of a buggy game at times. And managing inventory can also be a chore. Those are probably my two big gripes. But I also think narratively it's really strong, like the writing and stuff I mentioned, and I really did like all the character arcs. Even if the overall narrative is pretty straightforward, like the main through line, but I think a lot of the character work around the edges, like I think your party members, of course, are really well done, but I think even like some of the more side characters, like some of the villains, like I think Orin actually has a good backstory and is well developed, and Raphael I think is really well done, and like there's just a bunch of characters like that I think are really well done, that add a lot of flavor to the adventure. Yeah, and there's just so many neat touches. I really enjoyed this game. I think it's great.
Agreed.
And with that was a lengthy podcast about Baldur's Gate 3. And
There's
I think
a lot to say.
There's a lot to say. There's a lot we didn't say too. We could do
I'm glad we had a chance to get to it.
Me as well. Yes. Thank you both for joining me for this lengthy discussion. I've been Flex, joined by Ryan and Will, and thanks to anyone for listening. This has been another episode of the ATACS Podcast, and we are signing off, and we'll see you next time.